outside of us, and it got to Spacebar. And that's been kind of a testing ground for it. Especially, we didn't want to do like any kind of traditional early access because it just kind of felt silly for a game this small. But we also, I think, we appreciate quality over quantity, and so instead of like trying to foist it on people who would play it, we got it in Spacebar as an arcade cabinet, and that's kind of our testing ground. So there's a new level out today that we'll probably finish talking about this and go show it to you guys and come play the level.
So yeah, this was the very first playtest we actually did, was at Spacebar, because they have a fight night thing every other Tuesday. And Dave the Fave, who was he had an amazing show last night, apparently.
My God. Dedicated Servers was the best show of Treefort so far as I'm concerned. That was amazing.
But we had that first thing as this sort of testing, and it wasn't even in the arcade cabinet. Spacebar was just like, we want to kind of see what people are going to think about this. And I've told this story many times, but I just love it so much, is what Aaron was referring to with like frame timing. And because in fighting games, that's a big deal. And that was a beautiful moment of my life, because we go there and some random person I do not know comes up to me, because you can disarm in the game. Oh, nailed it.
We had a great time with that crew.
Yeah,
it was so much fun.
Yeah, but that whole night was amazing. So we got like a little pool going, and it was a great little tournament where a lot of people were able to play, with cheering, and it was truly like amazing kind of moment, and helped us test a lot of the bugs that end up happening, with the dagger falling out of the stage, and you being able to glitch a bunch of stuff, and that's kind of been a key thing we're talking about, as well as that this is an in development thing, and that if you're able to find bugs, let one of us know, because they'll haunt me for the rest of my life. So it'll be good that I know that. And that's kind of the point of it. That this is an iterative kind of.
That's definitely how we're keeping in theme, because that's what we've done with Spacebar is we'll add a new level in and then see how people play it. And what ends up happening is we find things that we have to fix. Because, we can test things ourselves, but when you're testing something that you made, you understand it on a certain like intrinsic level. And usually there's things that slip through the cracks. So the first people to play the new level were yesterday, and they broke it a lot. So if you guys want to come hang out with us, break our game so we can figure it out. But that's been the honestly the really cool thing about this. There's a new trend in retro gaming to do kind of homebrew retro games, and so you'll see that like people are making homebrew Game Boy and Super Nintendo cartridges, and there's a little bit of a scene for indie arcade cabinets, and Spacebar just has a real interest in people developing things and making interesting things in the Valley. And so when we got in touch with them, that was the draw to this, was we had something that was playable. It's really simple. If it breaks, it breaks, and people don't get super mad at it. And when we come up with new content, we can put it in there and people test it out and play it. We see how it works and then fix it from there. So. Mm-hmm.
But then it finally fully launched in Spacebar itself, and it was amazing to actually have it in there, and just see like an actual physical manifestation of all this stuff. We had the art done for it, and it was definitely super transcendental to actually see it. And yes, I also got to see the bugs.
You'll be too modest to mention the story, but the first day that went in there, Dean was running back, I think, 4 or 5 times fixing bugs. That's how it always goes. We thought we had a totally solid thing. We play tested it a bunch, and then as soon as it got in there,
everything broke.
Yeah, you were having a good time running back and forth fixing
stuff. That was really. I forgot about that. Yeah, now I would literally run back and forth, biking back and forth, and then realizing I forgot something. I think it was like easy. I probably biked like 10 miles that 20 miles.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, for some reason you decided to go back to your place.
It just, you know what? It was. I felt. But
what it comes down to is that these stories are consistent. Anytime you make something like this, it's going to surprise you, and you're going to do more than you thought you did with it.
Exactly. And always on the first day, everything is always broken. That's just no matter how much you test. It's like Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And that's a tale as old as time in anything, video game or not. But yeah, essentially what we've been doing now is we initially just launched with just the first level, a sacrifice for Sladakthus. Which is 2 cultists killing each other, as beautiful as that is. We made a champion for Ignithia after that, which was using hammers to sort of smack these warriors off a tall pillar.
So this is, just so it doesn't get too confusing, this is the thing that I think was a real winner between the idea that the two of us came up with, was that it's a fighting game which we're both fans of. We play Smash, Soul Calibur, all that kind of stuff. But it's a fighting game that's very like easy to get into. There's 2 buttons, and one of those buttons is context sensitive to if you have the weapon in the stage or not. And then what we wanted to do was come up with rule sets. So it was like a weapon. The first stage is a knife, and it was like 3 a.m.
Yep.
the day before we're submitting, and I was like, there are 2 cultists that are completing a sacrifice, and they're sacrificing each other. So we just kind of had this crazy idea come out. And that's what it ended up being. Like, it's called Devout Tournament because we've been writing this lore in the background where there's every 200 years, there is a pantheon of gods that has their devout come together to fight and see who sits on top of the pantheon. And so each god has an arena and each god has a weapon. And it's really fun to make that flavor text. But the thing that I think we landed on that was really cool with that is that those weapons become something specific to each stage. So in the first one, it's a knife that you're stabbing each other with, and you're trying to pass that back and forth and see who drops health first. The second stage is you knocking somebody out. So there's no health. There's no health bar or anything reading on the second stage. It's just you try to knock somebody into a magical wall, and if you do it twice, you throw them out of the stage. And then the stage itself actually changes where it gets smaller as you're hammering on it. And the third one, I think, is honestly, it expresses something that Dean and I, this is why I've always really appreciated making games with Dean. I've had a great time with him. I think we like talking about what makes things fun, what makes things interesting. And the latest level, where the previous 2 were melee weapons, the latest level is an arrow that gets fired from the player. And that means that you can do like crazy bank shots, try to really sneak around somebody. And that's the expression in the gameplay has always been a big deal. So when you're like trying to stab somebody, you can feign an attack with a dash and then go in and go for a stab, and that leads to parries and all these crazy things. And it's just, how do you play it? The arrow leads to, you can be very aggressive and straightforward, or you can do bank shots. But what we really came down to was the parry system, where you gain the weapon from the other player. In the new arena, because it's an arrow, you're not grabbing it from the other player, you're grabbing it out of the air. And what happens is when you grab it out of the air, it gains momentum, and the next time you shoot the arrow, it's faster. So we really like rewarding players for being good at our game. And so if they're really good at our game, they're going to parry that 4 or 5 times out of the air, and they're going to have a really fast arrow that's bouncing a lot in the stage.
Yeah.
And that was something where we just went, we're not going to cap it.
No.
We're just going to see how much, we're going to see how far this can go. So currently it flies out of the level a lot. We're working on fixing those bugs and stuff. And I hope you guys come and break our game, as I've been saying. But that's kind of part of our design philosophy with this. We want to see what's fun and how far things can go.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely true, is that oftentimes in a lot of different games, which is completely fair, is things are capped. You can only run so fast, you can only fall so fast, you can only attack so much. But we've always found that the games that both me and Aaron seem to really enjoy are ones that just let you completely break. If I can brick a game and it literally crashes my computer, that's a success in my book.
Yes. Yeah, because you did that yourself.
Yes, I've done that many times.
That's a rewarding experience, breaking something and making it just absolutely over the top.
Yeah.
You have to really try. I don't think I've gotten more than 3 parries on the new level.
No, not at all.
It can go way beyond that, but if somebody starts getting a lot further than that and doing crazy stuff on that stage, I want to reward them.
Yeah.
That's impressive stuff.
100%. So, yeah, honestly, that's pretty much all we had, just to kind of solve what we said. Does anybody has any questions about anything, about design or anything like that? Yeah.
Okay, so I can speak to that because I've handled the majority of that stuff. Once again, this started as the Game Maker's Toolkit 48-hour game jam, July 2019, and every time Dean and I have done that game jam, we've gone in with a set of goals. And my goal that time was I had a base sprite kind of built. I use A Sprite to do pixel art. I had a base sprite kind of built, and I went, all right, I want top-down 8 directional sprites in a 3D environment. and that was kind of the thing. There's something about that aesthetic that I really like, and I just wanted to like make that happen. And every time I have set a goal, I have driven myself insane by the second day. And that was one where, I was spreading for about 30 hours straight just because I needed to get those animations together. So we had, like I had mentioned earlier, we came in with a couple different ideas where I wanted kind of hooded rogues stabbing each other. And Dean really liked this idea of a game of footsie where there's one attack and you're just kind of seeing how much finesse you can put into that one attack. So I'm making these sprites. I started putting these hooded cowls on them. I wanted them to be kind of gross. There's you'll hear the voice lines from the original cultists when they die, and they're just like hissing and nasty.
Those are recorded in my closet, I'm pretty sure.
Yep. Yeah. It was my phone in your closet, me sitting there going, disarmed. What ended up coming out of that was I think I took a walk at about like 2 a.m. at some point, and I came back and I went, there are two cultists that are trying to kill each other for their awful god, and that god is named Sladacthus, and I came up with an awful spelling of it that Dean's never gotten right, and this is a bit of an Easter egg, but I'll spoil it at this point. If you click the level a sacrifice for Sladacthus in the game, it constantly respells Sladacthus as something else because it's supposed to be like
I have misspelled it. I still don't think I know. I still can't spell it properly.
It's that Cthulhu, like unpronounceable kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, what that led to was we came up with the lore from that. Like we had this evil chaos god starting out, and then it was like, okay, what are the next gods? The latest one, I'm more than happy to talk about it because I actually really like the concept of the latest god. He's a green man spirit named Bawe, and his realm was a like massive Secret of Mana style like forest. And at some point in the last run of the tournaments, his devout lost fantastically, and his realm has become a desert. And so we have these like carnivorous, sounds cooler than they are, but these carnivorous like Venus flytrap characters in there throwing arrows around. But that was the whole concept, is that the once lush forest has become a desert. It's kind of desolate, and you're playing in an arena that is a nursery for magical seedlings from the tree. There's a bunch of lore in it, but it's just kind of there for my own fun. It's very masturbatory, me just making this stuff.
Sweet.
Anyways, sorry that took forever. It's just fun lore. It's just like, what do we come up with, and how does that the weapon that I am most excited to make is I'm a big fan of D&D, so I have a race planned out that are kind of like water Ganassi, and their god is a patron of craftsmen. It's like a patron god of craftsmen. So the weapon is going to be something that is a one-hit kill, but it requires intense finesse. And that one, I think that'll probably be the last one that we get to, but I'm really excited for that one. So if you hang out with us at Spacebar and play the new levels as they come out, you'll eventually see that one.
I've got a question, and then anybody who does have a question, let me pass the mic to you guys too. When you say break the game, I assume that's like a dead screen or something that can potentially happen within the game?
It'll be like a dead screen, or just the game actually like bugging out, and to the point like a lot of times, like the worst types of bugs that we've definitely run into are ones where like it's like a soft lock, right? Where the game doesn't necessarily crash on you, but the weapon is ungrabbable.
So that leads to my question: was a big inspiration Billy Mitchell and Steve Wiebe from King of Kong Fistful of Quarters, if you've seen that documentary?
I know exactly what you're talking about. I have to say Billy Mitchell is a dirty cheater. That's gonna get me in trouble. The inspiration is there's a lot of places this goes. I love talking about game design, so if you want to pick my brain on this is a personal passion of mine, especially with how it applies to kind of like simple mechanics and how we interact with a game. There's a concept called meaningful choice that I think is something we explored very successfully here. And it doesn't seem that impressive, but the fact that we have just 2 buttons, One of those is something that changes based on where your character's at. But it allows for a lot of self-expression. Dean is a very good fighting game player, and recently I realized that the way I could beat him in this game is by like just becoming full chaos.
Yes.
And so that has become my play style. Like I will feign, and then throw myself on an attack in 3 different directions and come back and get him. It's the only way I can do it. I really think that offering a player a simple rule set and then allowing them to express themselves within that is something that is really compelling and interesting. So that's where like breaking the game currently, we're figuring out the bugs on the new level. When you send an arrow, 50 miles an hour outside of the stage, we have to reset it. But the fact that you can do that, I think, is way more interesting than us saying that you can only shoot it this fast.
Yeah.
Okay, is that better? Okay. I was just curious, you were talking about On to the Future and what's next. So you were talking about more levels that you're interested in. So I was curious if you have ideas for other levels and if you have any plans to like expand the cabinet to other places or put it on Steam or anything like that.
There definitely is a plan to hopefully get it on Steam at some point. We felt, at least for right now, there isn't enough content to warrant it really being on Steam. That's a large process to get on the Steam, which is totally fair. We have definitely ideas to expand, even adding like a single player kind of campaign sort of thing against like an AI that's trying to attack you, and you can use different weapons to kind of deal with that. But in general, at least for right now, just in Spacebar now, we've definitely looked at potentially going to like PAX East or West or anything like that and get to different cabinet locations. But yeah, probably it'll just be the first step to just be getting 4, 5, 6-ish levels that we might want to add to that. And then once those are there and feeling solid, we'll start adding more.
So this is where, talking about ourselves is really cool. But I think a thing that we want to bring to the table with this project is the fact that this is something that people can do and that there is an interest for in the Valley. So the cool thing about this for us is that we made a game that we sat down and played and went, wow, this is really fun. We really like this. This is our kind of game. And Spacebar looked at that and ran with it and gave us a place to set it up. And so when we make new content, we have something that is not easily available to indie developers. Like indie developer, you can go out on itch.io, you can throw things out there and try and get people to play test your stuff. And there are people who are obsessed with that kind of concept and very rigorous, and they're very helpful. But you can't really beat having like 20 drunk people on a weekend coming in and bashing your game to pieces and see what happens with it. But Spacebar is very interested in having other indie cabinets. So, we did this, and this was honestly a very simple thing for us and something that's a passion and we're interested in doing. But if other people want to take up that mantle and make a prototype, you should go down there and talk about it.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. So yeah, that's really what led us to the future of the cabinet, was that we could test out levels, see how they go, start adding actual polish and get it to a point where it really is presentable. I think the next thing that I want to do is I really want to rework the UI on the stage select, because it's ugly as sin, but it's there and it works and people play it. And I have the best time going down there and just looking over people's shoulders as 2 people are playing our game and having a great time. And I can't believe they're doing it. It's just so much fun. Yeah.
How did you and Spacebar start talking about putting the game in their bar? Like, how did that happen?
That was a friend of mine has been kind of involved with them for a while on some of their tech side. And over the course of lockdown and the pandemic, I got involved building custom installations for them. But what ended up happening is Dean and I just made this thing, and we couldn't stop talking about it because it was actually fun for us. That is one of the most rewarding things in the world, is when you make something. I used to be a songwriter and performer, and when you make something that you're just like, I really like this myself, it's awesome. So Dean and I couldn't shut up about it, and word just got down there. And then Spacebar Fights is a thing that they do where people show up and they bring their computers and their fight sticks. They set up like Tekken and Dragon Ball Z tournaments. It's awesome. But we we brought it down there and just we went, okay, well, if you guys are interested in indie games, we have this. Let's bring it down and see how it does. And it played well enough. It's just kind of a party game that it was worth putting in there so other people could play it. That was how that ended up happening.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, going once. Oh, we got another one. Let's go.
Did you design the cabinet yourself? And if you did, how did that go?
You got that.
Okay, so that's been a collaborative process with Spacebar, and honestly, it's really simple. This is the thing where it was like, how'd you make an arcade cabinet? And I want to say, well, that stuff is cheap and readily available on Amazon. So what we did is we bought a computer. The thing that I really like is that instead of doing 8-gate joysticks, we got full analog sticks. So the precision of like where you're attacking and how you're playing once again, personal expression in the game, it's fully there. It's stupid simple to make something like this. There's a little fluff in there just because we have like a nice subwoofer and a speaker system that doesn't get used all that much. But yeah, you kind of just get the small pieces that you need and put it together.
And then another thing too is that for the actual technical side of it, of the actual like fighting sticks and buttons, we use Unity as the game engine that we're using. And while it isn't happy with those types of inputs, you can make it work by just enough trial and error. So we used to have an interactual game where we can just toggle in between using arcade input and then not using arcade input, just using like normal controllers. And that's how we test it. Because if we had to test every single time down Spacebar, it would be a nightmare. But yeah, we just have a lot of USB. Honestly, just all USB sticks, just going all over the place, and that's pretty much how it's all hooked up entirely. So
I mean, that's the fun of these kind of things, and that's why I say Spacebar encouraged us solely because we were out there making something. If you guys ever have an interest in you've made something, like it is that easy. Like there's money involved, and we've been really lucky that they've worked with us in kind of funding the cabinet. We make the game, they make the cabinet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this stuff is totally doable. I think there was a question about like if we have any interesting ideas for it. The one thing I would put out is that if you ever dig into like what Japan was doing with like their arcades, or even I'm a big retro gaming fan, so like Super Nintendo is one of my favorites. And there was an era in Japan with the Super Famicom where they were pushing out like live voice actors to satellite broadcast games. It's insane stuff. And their arcades had really crazy ideas too. What I would love to do is eventually get kind of a personal skin system like in the game, something where you could show up and you could have like your devout, you could have your character and what god you're worshiping and playing as. And we maybe start integrating that in different places around Spacebar where you're logging in as your own kind of individual person and playing different games. But there are like the indie arcade world is small. I think its biggest presence is in New York and a couple other places, but there's really interesting places to go with it. I'd like to see other people jumping in and kind of doing hobbyist stuff and coming up with neat ideas where we could have really kind of unique gameplay that you don't get anywhere else. Anyways, I can ramble for too long about this stuff. I think Dean was pointing to this. We would love it if you guys came with us and went and checked out the new level. And if you want to fight Dean and I, we'll take you on.
I won't lose, but you can try.
It's next door. It'll be at Spacebar after. It'll be back there after Hackfort. It's down there all the time. But yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm 24.
more and more in throughout the marketplace. And the first one is essentially what we'll label brand jacking. Brand jacking is where criminal organizations purposely go through and set up fake looking ads, fake looking websites, and pull you through traditional social media or ad channels to their sites to set up and get as much information as they can from you. Let me give you this particular example. You're probably on social media and you see an ad for a mortgage company. And let's say it's a really well-known mortgage company that constantly is out there advertising in radio space and TV space and certainly over in social media. And the opportunity looks really, really good. So you click on it. And it takes you to this website that looks like and acts like and even has the little browser lock and everything else. All the little things that you've been taught through school and through your organization's training and awareness. Everything looks valid. Everything looks good. Asks you to go through and fill out this information, give us your name, your social security number, your address. Hey, we're going to give you a response on your mortgage in very, very short order. Just upload your W-2s, upload your tax statement, and we'll get you an answer in 48 hours or less. You do all that. Looks wonderful. You're going to take advantage of the opportunity that you have. You want to consolidate your debt. You want to do something. I don't care what it is, but this opportunity looks really, really good. So you give them all of this information. 48 hours goes by. Nobody's calling. You suddenly reach on out to the mortgage company. Mortgage company has never heard of this opportunity, never heard of who you are, where you were, the information that you've provided. In fact, they've come right out and said, we would never ask you for that in the first sequence of conversations. That's happening more and more and more. The opportunity that criminal organizations are seeing by essentially locking into how we as consumers buy and how we activate on taking advantage of opportunities and offers that are put forward to us. They're watching us, they're seeing us, they're wanting to take full on advantage of what we do. Which brings me to the next problem. Criminal organizations are looking more and more not like the pop culture perspective, which is just a couple people sitting in a garage or sitting in a basement, again, hooded hackers themselves trying to break on in. No. Criminal organizations are well funded. They are well backed. They are well organized and they're specialized. And they continue to look like and act like corporations and organizations that you see and interact with on a daily basis. Except their goal is to grab as much of your data as they can, or as much of the organization's data that they're targeting as they can, so they can then sell it, monetize it, and continue their propagation. The entire approach is learning from and using the platforms that we see and interact with on a daily basis. Social media, customer service, fulfillment, all of these things are built into their criminal organizations, and they're purposefully building them these ways because they know that we as consumers act upon the methods and approaches that real organizations use to collect up our data. All right. So now that I've left you kind of in the space of, oh crap, now what do I do? Let me give you some perspective. Boise State's taken really strong approaches to try to make certain we put more and more people on the field. If you're interested in cyber at any way, shape, and form, please come join us. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pathways and why you should pursue a career. So I'm past my 30 minutes, I know, and I want to try to at least leave a few minutes, maybe 5, for Q&A, see if anybody has any questions. I'm going to roll through these very quickly, but cyber has changed. Instead of wanting to be an individual impacting organizations, Cyber is all about serving. Being part of the blue team means that you want to serve. You want to be a part of a community, knowing that you're protecting not only your data, your family's data, your extended family's data, your community's data against the people that are purposely, actively trying to get it and use it against us. One other thing, you love learning. I wake up every single day in this industry and I've learned something new. Why? Because the bad guys are purposely trying to stay one step ahead of us. Actually, they're about 5 steps ahead of us, really. And we're just barely trying to catch up to those steps. What can you do with a degree in cyber? Well, as I mentioned before, you don't need to be a bit flipper. You don't need to be a computer scientist. You don't need to be somebody who has to go through calculus and differential equations. Instead, we need analysts and engineers. We need entrepreneurs, people who see a problem and are willing to put together a business and take the risk to go start something. I've done that 5 times and it's been very rewarding, no doubt. You want to be a lawyer. Guess what? If you're going to want to be a lawyer in any way, shape, and form, hopefully many of you don't. My daughter does, but maybe not everybody does. But understanding technology, understanding how to use it, understanding cybersecurity is a pathway into being a lawyer. You can also be somebody who's in marketing. You want to go focus on marketing or sales or business operations or finance. And the reason is this. Cybersecurity is oftentimes thought of as a job that I go and I work at St. Luke's or go work at Albertsons. The reality is that the cybersecurity industry, from a technology provider and technology space and professional services space, is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They need business operations people. They need finance people. They need marketing people. And if you can understand cyber and understand the terms and concepts of cybersecurity, you can, and you want to focus on marketing, and that's what your career is, you can very easily get a job in cybersecurity, knowing the terms, knowing the concepts, knowing the avenues, and knowing the adversaries. Ultimately, I always like to leave this in. What makes a good cybersecurity professional? You treat people with respect. I'll sum it up this way. You're humble, you're hungry, and you're smart. You're humble. You treat people with respect. You're hungry. You're constantly learning, constantly wanting to know more. And you're smart. I don't mean IQ smart. I mean people smart, EQ smart when I say that. You understand how people act, why they act a certain way, and you're there ultimately to help them. Next couple of slides I'm going to show really quickly, just to give you some perspective of what we're trying to do. We recognize that there's no singular path to success. In cyber, you can come from anywhere. You can come from a high school graduate all the way through, you're just wanting to go get some knowledge and skill development. You just want to go back to school and get some additional learning. And the opportunities in the workplace abound. For-profit, nonprofit companies, state government, national labs, INL is constantly hiring. They're constantly looking for people. And then of course, employers outside of Idaho are now looking to Idaho as a source of a cyber workforce. Our general perspective at Boise State kind of aligns to 2 pillars. Our curriculum, our great curriculum structures, as you'll see in the next slide, talk about knowledge and help you learn the necessary knowledge. And then we also have structures like at the Institute and elsewhere where you get competency. You get competency through simulation development and also going on out and building your skills, building your competencies before you graduate in real world situations, real world environments. This is a great slide because this helps. When I show this slide to other academic institutions and I show it to organizations around the country, they kind of stop and pause and they go, Boise State has all of this in cyber? And the reality is yeah, we do. We have a complete curriculum stack, certificates all the way up through a PhD. in cybersecurity. We are in a handful of universities at a national level who have this capability and have the quality of instructors and the quality of systems to be able to activate a workforce across all of these different areas. All right. I got a few minutes left. I hope that was helpful. I'm open to questions. Again, my name is Ed Vasco. I'm the director for the Institute for Pervasive Cybersecurity. My contact information is there. If you have any questions, please reach out. Looking forward to any sort of conversations. Any questions? Wow. I left everybody speechless or bored. That's wonderful.
Is this on? There we go.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that a defender had to be right all the time and
Yes.
the attacker right once.
Yep.
So how do you cope with that responsibility as a cybersecurity professional? Like, do you lean on your team, on your management team, on who to cope with that such a responsibility?
That's a wonderful question. And that's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. It's about the team. It's about the community. So, and it's about this changing mindset. For multiple decades, we took the approach of saying, hey, you know what? It's you as a hacker, it's you as a hacker, it's me as a hacker. And we get together at conferences and we all expound how wonderful we are and what we've done. And here's the really cool thing that I just did. And everybody claps. The mindset's changed. We've got to be able to have a community where we can rely upon each other. There's no doubt that you know, constantly trying to be right all the time can be an interesting set of challenges mentally, physically. And so as within your organization, you have to rely upon the team around you. And that team may not necessarily be all in cyber. It could be within IT, it could be within HR, it could be within operations, it could be within legal. So it's also being willing to pull these other team members towards you to say, hey, I need your help. I need you to be part of my community as I'm helping drive a better cyber perspective here in the organization that you work for. So you're not standing as a pillar, assuming the weight of the world on you. The goal is to build up that community of people, both cyber professionals within the organization, as well as others that you may pull in from elsewhere to help you carry that load. Good question. And then also realize, I'll add this in, also realize that we have both local chapters of cyber community professionals, as well as international chapters of cyber professionals that you can reach out to and engage and get additional advice, and realize that you're not alone. You're not sitting out there by yourself, assuming the weight of the world. Yep. Other questions, please?
Where does actively increasing consumer awareness and understanding fit in? So I think about teenagers, they don't get it, that how porous the environment is that they're providing information. Like,
Yeah.
how do you just help people with the psychology? Like, where does that fit?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And really it's one that is kind of, it's the elephant in the room from our industry's perspective. How do we continue to push the messaging that we need to push in a way that helps younger people and older people? Because really, if I look at the bulk, if I look at the wave of attacker, of who's being attacked, you actually have two major avenues, and it's the elderly. So people older than me. So let's say people 65 and older, so retirees, and people 20 and younger. Those are the two major population sets that are generally targeted by cyber criminals. On the youthful side of that attack curve, it's predominantly because they're technology aware and they're privacy agnostic, meaning they've grown up in a space where privacy is no longer a concern to them because they have everything online. Well, it kind of goes to that data message I said before, that data slide I had. If we're going to have that much data, why are we keeping it? So there's a part and a want to say to young people, you don't have to hold on to all this data. Go through and delete it. Take care of yourself and clean up your own data. And that's a challenge. You want, my life is my data, is really what, the social change that's occurring. So we're kind of fighting a cultural shift there, and helping young people understand the need to maybe not be privacy aware, but at least be data aware. Is this data of use to you now and in the future? At the other end of the spectrum, it's actually helping people understand that the avenues of attack and the avenues of fraud are rampant within the elderly community. And scams have always been there. There's no doubt. But the propagation of technology has allowed for this explosion to occur. So helping them understand and be aware. Organizations like AARP, others out in across the country are trying to message to both sides of that. There's a lot of work being done by STEM Action Center, as an example, here in the state around cyber hygiene, cyber citizenship, digital citizenship. What does it mean to be a good digital citizen? And making students aware of how they need to protect themselves online. The hope, certainly, along with what I've said, is this kind of shift in perspective, that we're not a bunch of individuals kind of off doing our own things and we're only a third of the team on the field. The shift in community and shift in want to talk about how we as a group defend ourselves, hopefully will start to shift the mindset of both young and old. So it's a good question. But it is a major challenge that we're faced with right now, and I don't have a good answer, unfortunately. Thank you, though. One other question? I think final question, right?
I'm wondering about the massive increase of processing that 5G technology can do with other countries. Does that give them an incredible edge in terms of their, and I imagine the armies would be computer scientists to countries like China are just producing with that technology. I just imagine that being how do we protect ourselves from that?
No, it's a great question. And it's one that I laughed when you said 5G, is because that was actually one of the key pillars of this Air Force conference I mentioned that I just came back from. And the reality is that technology is being pushed into the marketplace. Its applications are still being determined because of the transformation in speed and functionality. So, 5G takes us from kind of where we sit right now with LTE and 4G tech, and suddenly makes your phone as though you were sitting at home on your hotspot Wi-Fi, and it kind of begins to say, why do we even need Wi-Fi at home? We can just activate everything around 5G and move in that direction. So this transformation, every single time that we have this transformation in speed and technology, there's not just a pillar of democratization, meaning enabling more and more people to use technology differently in their lives, but there's also avenues of data activation. And that data activation is exactly your point, is we're going to suddenly see this huge level of data collection. In fact, it's public knowledge. Our military service branches are looking at activating warfare and theaters of war using 5G. Okay. And think about the type of data and the amount of data that can be collected on a worldwide basis, not just on a local national basis, but on a worldwide basis, both from a geospatial standpoint, as well as from a ground-based standpoint. They're going to collect up this onslaught of data. And this was the problem I posed to them, is when we activate that particular kind of platform, there is going to be this massive explosion of data into the Department of Defense and into each military branch. Put aside the cost of that, because we can print money. Okay, put aside the cost of that, of storage and so forth. It's the analytics of why are we holding on to this data? And when I posed that question, nobody could actually answer it. Why are we holding on to this data? Let's set a term. We need this data for a month. Drop it after a month. Well, what if we want to do trending? What if we want to do other types of analysis? What if we want to build a machine learning or AI construct? Okay, now you suddenly activate a completely different realm for me. And that is AI training data poisoning. If I have the ability to go into Amazon right now and I say to them, hey, I'm going to you've got these machine learning processes that tell us and give us suggestions and so forth. And suddenly I start poisoning that data. And I start making you buy or showing you things that you would never have a want to look at. Well, what's that going to do to Amazon? It certainly could impact Amazon from a financial perspective. Think about the propagation of that in a military theater. So 5G is going to explode the amount of data. Every single transformation of technology explodes data. What we do with it, how we use it, how long we hold on to it. Those are the three key questions I would pose to us as technology companies, as technology or as data users, and understand the impacts of that. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but probably doesn't directly, because the challenge is that we're going to have this explosion of data. Irrespective, we're going to have the explosion. What we do with that explosion and what we do with the resulting data is how we set ourselves up either to start seeing continued improvement in the cyberspace and cybersecurity, or that 464,000 job number suddenly explodes to millions of people everywhere nationally. Yeah. So, great questions. Thank you. Demonstration.
All right, folks, that is all the time we have. If you have 8 more additional.
Tested it out just now, makes the compression of the images look terrible. I don't know if you have a better solution for me to use my presenter notes as on
Hey,
Keynote.
everybody, friends,
I can think of now.
families, Hackfort.
Uber.
I was
And
out
use
pretty
my
late. I was
iPad
actually
with my
out
notes on the side, which I
late
don't
with-
want.
Cool, thank you. All right. If anyone has any questions at any time, don't be afraid. Raise your hand or just start shouting at me. Perfect. And I have Dylan here. He has a mic, so we can ask the question.
Cool.
So if anybody has a question, feel free. No questions too simple either. We're dealing a lot with radio frequencies in this. And when I first learned about radio frequencies, or right before I started to learn about them, they were essentially black magic. It's stuff that you can't see going through the air, affecting other stuff. It total magic, right? There's no way to tangibly understand radio frequency. So that's what we're going to try to understand first. And that's going to help us understand electronic warfare. So I've been working at a company called Black Sage for 3 years now. And the company develops automated counter drone systems. So the best way to take down a drone, plain and simple, in today's battlefield is electronic warfare. It's being able to disable it essentially without trying to shoot it down or knock it down out of the air. It's just to flat out disable it. And there's a couple different ways to do that. So when I think of electronic warfare, I'm thinking of these kind of 3 different categories. So we've got jamming, mitigation, and high power microwave. The high power microwave is maybe borderline electronic warfare, but it uses the exact same principles of jamming and mitigation. And we'll get into that a little bit later. So before we get into any of those, we'll do a quick summary, maybe for some people, but more of a walkthrough of how radio frequency works, because that's the backbone for electronic warfare. So this might, if it gets a little too technical for anybody, again, just let me know. I can clarify whatever. I might skip over something because there is quite a bit. So right here, I've got this graph. This is a really good way to kind of visualize what we're talking about when I say radio frequency and the radio spectrum. So what we're looking at here is it's a huge bandwidth of basically every radio frequency that's measurable or calculable. But what we're talking about when we say radio frequencies, or like the radio spectrum, as you can see here, it's that 1 kilohertz to 100 gigahertz. And you can see visible light is an even higher frequency of that, right? But as far as communications go, radio frequency communications, when it comes to like unmanned systems, or when it comes to Bluetooth or your phone or this microphone that's wirelessly connected, we're typically talking about like the 4 megahertz to maybe the higher end of 60 gigahertz. So it's an even smaller chunk out of that whole radio spectrum. But as far as what's useful for us to use as a radio communication, we're looking at a very small snippet of that. So, and that's kind of the what I'll be talking about today. So, radio frequencies, there's as you can see, a transmitter and a receiver. The transmitter and the receiver will be an antenna. That antenna is being powered and frequency is being emitted or received to and from that antenna. That's a whole nother talk, maybe next time, as far as the idea and physical principles of an antenna. But radio frequency always has a transmitter and receiver. Radio frequencies can also be a high frequency and a low frequency when you're kind of talking about these in certain contexts. A high frequency in the purposes that we're talking about in like radio communications, we're talking about a short wavelength. It's like that 24 gigahertz that I have up there, or 24,000 megahertz. That's I would say a short wave length, high frequency for radio communications. There's cases where we go up to like 60 gigahertz or even higher for like SATCOM communications and radar as well. A low frequency, the long wave that you see on the bottom there, it's a 4 megahertz. So that 4 megahertz is typically what you'd see with like walkie-talkies. There's not a lot of data being sent like over a walkie-talkie. It's like an audio signal. Whereas a high frequency, you'd actually would send like video. So a lot of data is being sent over. And that's kind of the benefit of either, or the weaknesses of either. So there's going to be certain cases where you're going to use a high frequency versus a low frequency. The high frequency also doesn't travel through medium as well as a low frequency. And it doesn't penetrate through stuff. So like walls and other bits like that can get in the way of a high frequency, where a lower frequency could get right through it. There's also the concept of like a low power and a high power. So you can have the exact same frequency, but you can have a low power of that frequency, and you can also have a high power of it. This is kind of a simple concept, but the idea is this directly impacts when you're building a jammer, or you're worrying about mitigation or something like that. Power also drops off over distance exponentially. So it's not like a linear association with the power over distance. We're looking at an exponential logarithmic drop off with that distance. So it's maybe more context just to understand that. And then the last little bit that we're going to highlight on radio frequency is it's called a signal to noise ratio, SNR. And this is kind of the basis of jamming itself. It's the idea that you're trying to compare a signal that's important to you that you want to send and receive versus just the ambient noise around you. So you can kind of think of it, hey, I want to have a Bluetooth connection between a microphone and my phone, but I'm in the middle of downtown. There's 100 different Wi-Fi routers around me. So all those Wi-Fi routers, you can consider that as noise. It's white noise, essentially. You don't care about it, but it's on the same sort of frequency that your Bluetooth is on, which effectively makes your Bluetooth less efficient, or it can't connect further away because the distance is too long now, and the power and everything there. So you're comparing the power of your signal versus the power of the white noise. And if your ratio's over 1, that means you've got a high signal to noise ratio. That means you're typically able to see that signal, versus a low signal to noise ratio where your signal gets lost. And it's hard for receivers to pick it up unless you do some technical math. But even then, there's a point where it's too low. So that gives you a really good idea on radio frequencies, so we can kind of get into jamming. I don't know if there's any questions or elaboration I can do further there, but we'll just dive into it. So the idea of a jammer is you've got a connection that you're trying to essentially block or sever. You're trying to prevent that wireless connection from happening. And so there is a transmitter and a receiver that you're trying to block, or trying to disconnect the cycle of communication from. So the idea is you would emit a jamming frequency to that receiver. So the receiver signal to noise ratio is low. You want to be able to introduce enough white noise, background noise, to where the signal is lost now. The receiver can't actually distinguish a signal anymore. It's too noisy. That's the basis of jamming. But what happens a lot of times is you have to worry about essentially a ratio. And the ratio of power and distance is something that you have to worry about, because sometimes you'll try to jam something and the power or the distance is too great for the transmitter and receiver that you're trying to jam. So you have to turn the jammer up in higher power so you can overcome that as a base case. There's also distance you have to worry about too. Maybe the distance of the jammer is really close to the receiver and the transmitter is really far away. We may not need as much power. So the idea that we're talking about here is a ratio. It's a DV to DJ ratio. It's the distance of the victim versus the distance of the jammer. And this concept actually first originated when telecom industries are are trying to set up mobile cell towers, and they want to understand, how many cell towers they need within an area. And that's going to be dependent on the noise and the environment of that area, because you might be in an area where it's very noisy and you need a lot of mobile towers. You need mobile towers with a lot of power to them. So in this case, the distance of the victim is basically the transmitter and receiver you're trying to jam, where the distance of the jammer is the distance between the receiver and the jammer. This gives you a ratio, because when you're trying to explain how effective a jammer is, it's hard to say, yeah, I've got a Wi-Fi jammer and it can jam out 1 kilometer. It really depends. There's going to be a lot of cases where, okay, well, how far away is the receiver to the transmitter you're trying to jam, or how high a power is that? It's a lot of different cases, and we see that with drones all the time too. You could buy a DJI drone and put it up, in the air, and it could be a certain distance away, but you could also build a hobby, grade sort of drone with a really high power. And your jammer is no longer as effective. So you have to give a ratio when you're trying to explain the effectiveness of a jammer. And we're going to take a little break while I kind of explain this, because it's really easy to word vomit what's going on with jamming. But the best way to actually understand how jamming works, I think, is to have the comparison to audio. So audio frequencies, we're looking at, like, I'm trying to remember if it's like 40 megahertz, something around there is kind of the frequencies that we're looking at. But with audio, what we're doing is we're vibrating in air molecules, right? So a little different than electromagnetic, radio frequencies, but the concepts are very similar, because we're still dealing with frequencies and waves and all that. So because of that, we can kind of explain how we can jam audio. And I'll just get right into it. Well, actually, we'll start out. I don't know if I have 2 people, if you 2 guys over there. So you can just stand right there right now, but you can kind of think of it as one's a transmitter and one's the receiver, right? The transmitter is your mouth, the receiver is your ears, and you can both be the transmitter and receiver simultaneously, of course, right? When you're having a conversation. But you can kind of think of it, you're in here and it's relatively quiet. You don't have to talk very loud to hear each other. But if you're in the middle of a concert, you have to yell at each other, because that noise, that white background noise, is really high. So you want your signal to noise ratio to be high too. You want to try and overcome that background noise. And so if I've got a jammer where I'm introducing white noise to your receivers, you're going to have to yell louder, or you're going to have to yell so loud that you can't hear anymore. So I've effectively blocked your communication with audio. So if I talk like this, it's really hard for you guys to have a conversation. And that's really, really hard, right? It's even harder if I get really, really close to one of the receivers, right? If I'm using my megaphone and I am right next to this guy, you might be able to hear stuff, but he may not. His receiver, his noise is way too loud. But vice versa, if I'm really far away, really, really far away, and I'm trying to use it, it's not going to be as effective. But this kind of gives you an idea as far as directional jamming, which is going to be an antenna-based, property. But the concept's kind of the same. So when you think of jamming, or you think of like signal to noise ratios, audio is really the best way to do it, because you can tangibly understand how those frequencies and how the power and the distance kind of relate with each other, versus just looking at a graph. So I thought that was kind of a nice way to explain that concept. Now we can kind of get into the mitigation part. So mitigation, what does that really mean? I've seen mitigation used around jamming kind of in the same sentence or the same word. And the idea with mitigation and at a technical sense is you're essentially hacking or taking over. I think there's an SDR radio hacking workshop going on too, which actually might be very similar to what I'm talking about here. But the idea of mitigation is you're not jamming a signal. You're not trying to sever the connection between the receiver and the transmitter. You're actually trying to like pirate
real-time motion
the
data,
connection.
super
You're trying
excited of
to
what they're up to.
emulate,
And I
you know,
work
a
on a lot
transmitter.
of projects that
So
are
that the
in
receiver can
media and entertainment that focus
get
on
the wrong
location-based
information or
entertainment in its own right.
manipulate the receiver to do what you want to do.
But at the end of the day, there's
which is
one thing
inherently
here.
trickier.
There's one thing here that keeps coming
The-
up.
the
I keep
physics,
showing
the-
up
the
as the
power
tech
of the-
humanist
the
in
radio
the room. I am often the one that is the ethical framework, asking the tough questions. Where's the humanism in everything that we're doing? You know, I ask in the future, in the next 10 years at the very least, do we want to be part of more XR walled gardens, or am I more interested in the accessibility of WebXR and open source? And one thing for certain is that I know AI will ultimately reflect all of our biases back to us. And that ethical framework, I keep saying, who's holding that? With every living or inanimate object soon that's going to have an AI, that's going to be our school teacher when we go outside or we put gear on, who exactly are those people programming all of those AIs? And how is that actually being informed for us to receive that information? And I've said this in several talks, do those AI engineers sit next to behavioral psychologists, cultural anthropologists, or sociologists in order to inform any of this AI? Who has the agency and the authority? So we need to ask what it means often to be human, and what is the value of humanity at the end of the day. So let's just say I care a lot about humanism, and going forward, not just our own social dilemma, but all of the humanist factors that play in everything we build. So it's by no mistake that I'm working in a vertical that is referred to as the death care industry, not the healthcare industry. And imagine holograms at your own funeral. And what's the ethical conversation around that? Why should that start happening right now? Is that taboo? Is it sacrilegious? For some folks, this awareness of death will help inform our life ahead, and especially for our kids, sort of demystifying the idea of death. Tom Emmerich had mentioned this he had a quote last year, or actually it was like maybe 5 months ago, that XR will be the death of death. And I find that really true. So yeah, last year in Forbes, I was called out as a digital embalmer. And ever since then, I'm trying to live up to this crazy title. I mean, one title I never thought my career would ever have. So once you decide a path and you work in the death care industry, all these things show up for you, right? So I'm actually driving home from the gym a few months ago, and out of my right window, I see this sign. And it's so small and insignificant that I actually drove 2 blocks, turned around, came back. I'm like, did I just see what I think I saw? Yeah, we buy souls. So all I could think of at the time is like, Tom Waits. What would Tom Waits? Tom Waits has that song. What's he building? What the hell is he doing in there? So I've been bantering this idea of being a digital embalmer, and we buy souls in our future, and what this means. I have done a lot of homework on We Buy Souls, so we can chat later about what exactly that means. But at the end of the day, where all this has brought me, where COVID, where this last year of how we've worked remote, it has brought a lot of clarity to the work I do, which is we're living in this tribrid moment. We're being asked to stitch together not just our physical and our digital lives, but now our virtual and immersive lives. And this seamless story about who we are in the physical world, the digital world, and the immersive VR or virtual world or XR world. So this is such a signature moment for us as makers, as storytellers in technology. And the point is we need to hear from everybody and have a shared taxonomy that's all inclusive. So that's what's informing a lot of this joint project. So the artist in residency at Cyril's place, I'm kind of the artist in residency, not actually in residency, but am I in residency, right? This is my attempt to find ways back to Boise, because 10 years ago when I first came to Boise, I thought, you know, this bumper sticker for this town should say, Boise, life is actually possible, because there was like free parking meters. I don't even think there were parking meters. There was like access. Nobody had an access problem. You could go walk right into the Capitol building. I was like, life is so possible here. So I'm hoping everybody is familiar with Searles Place, such a terrific arts organization in town that I've come to learn about. And months ago, I applied to be an artist in residence, only to come to find out, and Greg, you know this, there had been no immersive artists vertical for you all, but it's like many art organizations. It was of no surprise to me that we're in a moment, right? This is a new arm. And how could we not have immersive arts at this point when we've got Beeple's $69 million NFT digital art piece selling at Christie's? So how can we not start addressing where the immersive art world is going? And I'm not saying it's a 2D immersive art image inside a 3D world. I'm saying this opens the door to all senses as a experience of art. So my hope is the first sort of artist in residence here is that the local art community really meets the local tech community and begins to close a gap here. Because I know the Hackfort community might not be running over to the art community anytime soon, but through this project, I hope the Hackfort community does bridge itself with Searles Place and the art community, because I think everybody could stand to socialize together and really understand the intent. So let this be an invitation to really join over the next 6 weeks together and evolve in this really cool art project. So what this art project is about. So this team of collaborators we're bringing together two kind of unlikely fellows, even though John, you can talk to how you've been at this for a long while prior to me coming aboard, and what I see from a creative lens and how we're all working together. So the indigenous peoples and the neurodivergent communities, we're really going to find a meaningful through line here through this XR platform. And it's really about uncharted territories in some ways. And there's other themes that are rising to the top. So we've created what we're calling XR stories. Nothing about us without us is a phrase that comes from the disability rights community, and it has been used rightfully so in a multitude of initiatives. And it feels very right for this art piece to say nothing about us without us. So I'm learning, but we're first diving in and first starting with what John has done being here in town and recreating Searles Place as a digital twin. So that first order of magnitude is where we're starting, which is how do we take an arts organization that's in its physical form, move it into the metaverse, and then begin to tell stories inside of Searles Place to see what evolves. So with that, I want to introduce you to one of our team members, John Anderson. John, I know you're joining us live, but you're from the north. You're joining us live in Boise in the south, and I don't even know if it's north and south because there's still south to south there. But the esteemed John Anderson, why don't you take it away from here? And we haven't talked, but I can facilitate some of the slides here for you if you want to talk to it. I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I'll just tell you when to go next slides when we can.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm John Anderson. Enter the architect into the conversation. About 30 years ago, went to school to become a master builder and an architect. I've always been in the art community. Architecture is an expression of humanity. But something about 1991 hit where people started talking about something called the World Wide Web. Right? You know, people started to get emails, communications. My entire life has been in the virtual world. I've been working on computer systems essentially since I could remember, quite literally, from a Coleco ping pong game right at home, all the way into the Tandys, into the Commodore 64s, all into the Amigas, 386, you name it, right? It's been a huge, huge journey in a very short time. So I started speciating very quickly. I go up to school, actually graduated at the University of Idaho, also went to the Collegio del Romano to study architecture in Rome. And I started looking at the human speciation, whatever changing. Environments weren't just physical anymore, and they weren't just impacting people physically. Architecture was moving into the virtual world. And architecture, as we know, also has emotive responses, just like humans. It has a form, it has an art form, it has a communication and a story all behind, or I should say good architecture. So I through school, immediately started gravitating. I was fortunate to study under Professor Emeritus Brian Sumption, who worked under Archie Graham in London in the 60s. He was part of Buckminster Fuller's group as well. and some of these words, as you guys start to understand, are also futurist in the world. Worked through that and didn't realize how different we were starting to become. So flash forward to about 2001, we were kicked out of architecture, if you will, because we're these virtual guys. We don't exist there, right? And we pushed back. So we created a new program called Virtual Technology and Design, which is a different way of creating habitation for humans, if you will, and a motor response from it. Next slide, Kathleen. Yep, just a quick little shot. So in our world, it's the only world I can exist in with my, I'm highly creative. Architecture put too many boundaries on me. One of them called gravity, right? Gravity, that single force is what controls all of architecture, right? Materiality, right? What are we using to build that and fabricate it, right? Bricks and mortar, right? That's really limiting, right? To me. In the virtual world, all these lights and everything else, it's a photon. That same photon from the sun comes from the sun. We add creativity to it and put it back into your eye, right? Everything we're dealing with is digitals, on or off, positive or negative, yes or no, right? But with that, we can literally create anything you can imagine. It comes with a huge social responsibility. This is way outside of the field of architecture. So I was very pleased with my colleagues to push us out of that field because we're now into a new domain, which is XR storytelling, cross reality. So next slide, Kathleen. So I work at the University of Idaho. I've been there for 25 years. That's kind of weird to think about. I work in which is called the IRIC. It's a innovation studio where essentially no college exists in it. It's if you have high impact research, you're going to exist in it. We have a lab in there that really changes research and the way communication is being done, even at a higher institution like a university level. We do a lot of work, National Science Foundation, State Board of Education, National Institute for Advanced Transportation Technology, the EPSCoR programs, which is a NSF program. Trust for Mutual Understanding, that's a trust in Manhattan that looks at a lot of our indigenous communities in particular, the Micron Foundation, bring it back down here to Boise, et cetera. Max Planck, National Geographic. Next slide. And essentially, you can read this for yourself, but this is changing the way we do research and changing the way we communicate with each other on profound levels, right? Suddenly we can interact with the data. So the use of virtual graphics, to convey these complex concepts has become a very useful tool in education as well, just in research in general. It's evident in the sciences and engineering where the graphic and animated expression of concepts allows the practitioners the ability to visualize and interact with data to better understand the mechanics of complex and interrelated events and processes. The type of data we have to process as modern humans today is way outside the boundaries of our brains. I hate to say it any other way. The amount of information has to be processed. We are opening a relationship with artificial intelligence and XR that we need to use. If you think about calculators and technologies we already use, that's comfortable for us to already adapt those technologies, right? Because it gives us more than what we've had. For us to try and calculate some of the mathematics of today without using computer systems would take us back literally 100 years, right? So we come to this point where we have to go forward. So virtual design provides the ability to introduce users to the non-linear dynamics of these processes and provides novel ways to enhance, and that's a good word, enhance our understanding of reality. Each of us have our own perspective, our own perception of reality. It's a very important perception, but each of us has our own unique, special perception of that reality, right? So how can we even contact and communicate with each other in the modern world if we're all seeing a different picture, right? And in today's world, it's highly polarized, right? I can't believe you don't see that, right? In my world, that's exactly what's the correct way. And then suddenly, and through XR, you see and can walk through the shoes of somebody else for a mile or two, right? A neurodivergent student who suddenly is overwhelmed by sound and light. And they're told, well, just get used to it, adapt, because that's the way normal people work. We only design the world for maybe at best 60% of us, right? So we're entering a world that I think is going to be more compassionate. and we can start to share these stories. So next slide. I've been absolutely blessed. There's no doubt about it. Created a program of future leaders who see the world this way too. There was never a discipline before for these people. So architecture, back in the Renaissance, split into something called engineering. We don't even question engineering today, right? The Renaissance of Brunelleschi, if we will, and the calculation of forces and mathematics perception. We understood perspective again. We lost it, and then we suddenly realized you could calculate perspective, right? And art changed, everything changed because of our understanding of ourselves in the world. And we could start to calculate it. We could actually put numbers to it, right? Which evolves to today where those numbers are now worlds. We are in a new Renaissance. And that speciation coming out of architecture, which is the basis of society in my argument, is also speciating very rapidly. Okay, next slide. This looks different. We don't live in a basement. There's a lot of biases. We all are packed with biases, et cetera. And you say computer and everyone thinks, oh, okay, they're in the basement and in the dark, right? Or the computer creates this for everyone. No, it's very human. We're very active. Computer studios are different today than they were a few years ago, right? If you walk in and just see a bank of computers, we're probably not very modern. There's more sketchbooks, Sharpies, whiteboards, and the computer is only one of the design tools that we use within it. And you can see with VR and everything, it's highly interactive. People are questioning. In the far back, you can see a group of students working on a question in VR. So talking to Chuck about, we created a mammoth, a woolly mammoth that was discovered. And then we start to realize that through the bones and MRI scannings that there was actually an issue with the gait. So there was an injury on this thing. So we're like recreating time. Right. And so that's what my argument is with XR storytelling in particular. We're creating the time machine for our future generations to understand what we were going through. That leads us to this current research. The two areas in particular crosses over with the theme directly. I work with John Waterhouse. He is a wonderful individual, a National Geographic explorer. We've traveled the world. We go to Siberia in particular, working with indigenous communities, looking at Arctic amplification. This is climate change research saying, let's work with our communities and listen to them of what they're seeing in the environment. Not just listening to the scientific community, but the communities themselves by saying, what do you observe and how can we tell your story so the scientists and you can all come back together. Next slide. And that's also split in the other side with the work that I've met Jim Bradbury in particular with AXRI. It's the Autism Cross Reality Institute here in Boise. We are looking at creating worlds and working in the VR space. This is Nathan. I think I can speak on behalf of Nathan. Mitch, who is our director at the XRI, this is his son. Has autism, and he really was the start of a lot of this research. I knew Mitch actually through the University of Idaho back in our younger days. And he started talking about virtual reality and his experience that him and his wife have had. So Nathan was terrified of flying, was one of his issues. I went down to Salt Lake and did a flight simulator training and got to be in the cockpit of a pilot and role played the experience of what it was. And as Mitch says, it went from one of the worst plane flights to go down there to the best because his son suddenly could understand what was going on because of the use of VR. He also has got a very active mind. It's maybe a little ADHD, hyperactivity, and people want to give medications to calm him down to make him quote normal, right? You don't need to do that, right? You just need to enhance it. So this is one area that I find kind of poetic is they got him into VR1 here in Boise and Eagle, and they started doing VR simulations. And as Nathan put it is, Mom, Dad, I've had an itch in my brain that I could never scratch, and VR helps me scratch it, right? And I still get chills every time I say that. And that it was a profound moment as soon as I heard that. It's like, okay, we've got to uncover, we've got to listen to that story more, we've got to figure that out. And according to his parents, within 5 days after just a VR session on a Saturday when they go to VR1, he'll be calm and relaxed for about 5 days. And then by the next weekend, they know it's about time to go get another VR experience. And that's actually kind of a treatment, right? And there's something going on there. So we're gonna be diving into that a little bit more too, but that's where we've got to be listening to everybody's stories. not trying to tell them what we think is the answer. We need to listen to what the answer is, right? Next slide. I think we're getting close to, yeah. So again, this me, we live in this world, right? Some of the early work, this is talking about microbiology. We actually in 2007 and 2008 were international finalists for the International VISIES Challenge by the National Science Foundation. We created an environment for Toxoplasma gondii, right? We're living in these worlds that humans can barely even scan and see today, right? And this has changed. What a quick divergent on this one, just to show you how XR storytelling can expand our research and knowledge. My students created this world. They're working with the world's experts of what's going on in this world, and they see it differently, right? They're not seeing it chemically, they're seeing it spatially. They're asking innocent questions. And I always say you have to embrace your ignorance, because that's probably the purest you're ever going to be looking at something. And our students, they were worried about it after they create this world and interacted, and they had the expert there. They're like, "Oh, we've got these questions. We're so embarrassed. We don't want to ask them." I'm like, "No, ask them." They asked 5 questions to the gentleman about what's happening in this world that resulted in $5.2 million worth of research, right? Because they saw this world differently for the first time, and they were asking Dr. Rizabalaga, going, "What is this? What's happening?" And you saw him, "That's a really good question." "Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know," right? And we got this coevolution of knowledge that advanced humans, right? Just through the investigation, what it's like. Next slide. Which sums it up probably to this, and I'll let Chuck take after this. But everyone has their own unique perspective of reality, right? And so what I've been doing in my lab over the last 2 decades is to essentially create places where people can share and learn from those perspectives, to simplify it. XR storytelling, to try and simplify it, is every object you see has an embedded story to it, right? And has a way to communicate to it. We're used to human communication, but like I was arguing with architecture as well, Searle's place has an emotion. It has time, it has memories, it has art. It can change the society of the Treasure Valley just by existing itself. But it doesn't do that if it's just one person at a time. So Kathleen's residency, yes, is digital. But now we're not talking about one artist, we're talking about thousands. We're talking about a community now that can come in and embrace the digital twinning that is happening and hear from each other. I think that's my last slide. Thanks, Kathleen.
John, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I can't wait to be in physical form too, sharing all of that. So
well, I have to divert real quick, Kathleen, sorry, but I'm not convinced Kathleen exists.
Right.
To me, she is a digital twin and an artificial intelligent agent. I have never seen her. I do not know it exists, right? And yet we're creating something together. I didn't know Chuck existed until yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, this is what's so great about it, right? I may never physically show up. Chuck, before you take the mic, I just had to throw this slide in because a couple years ago, when you guys opened up Black Box's flagship experience, I think on Market Street, right, in San Francisco, I went to try it out. I think we met in person, if that's true. And I had such a great time, and I took some great photos. And this one I love just because it's so true. The experience was great. It was like, yep, level up your life. So with that, I wanted to introduce you all to Black Box VR, which you all know, obviously, and Chuck Westerberg. You, my friend, have the floor.
Well, thank you. It's going to be tough to follow up these guys. They're awesome people to work with, and obviously you're doing some amazingly meaningful stuff here in Boise and abroad in Northern Idaho and everywhere else for that matter. But first, I'd like to take just a quick second to introduce my colleague and good friend of mine, Jim Bradbury. He's a Black Box. We've worked together now for about 6 years. Kind of big brother to me, but awesome individual, and he's very active in the community. And as John was mentioning, has lots of things that he's doing to help out the kids with autism and things all across the board. He's also instrumental in helping Kathleen and John and everyone else in this project. So he can't be here today. His son is in Maine on a invitation to go to a lacrosse pro camp. So
nice.
So again, I'm Chuck at Black Box, and just to give you the quick 2 Second on Black Box, we created a virtual reality fitness company that merges resistance training and video game playing, so that you get up off the couch and get moving, and it's all quantifiable. So we just got a UCLA study that came out that said that our 30-minute workout is in the top 90% of all workouts, so that they compared it to, including like uphill mountain biking and bodybuilding and just steady state cardio, et cetera, et cetera. But what I really want to kind of talk about, you can go to the next slide whenever you want to, Kathleen. What we're really here for is obviously for to talk about Searles Place and this new art medium, and just to tell you guys, the main goal of this entire project is really to encourage the community to participate in Searles Place, not only in this early stages of this project, but as it unfolds over the next few months and into the future. And so if you guys have questions, or somebody that might be interested or that wants to go to Searles Place and participate, please let them know. The more the merrier. I mean, this is going to be a really cool thing, and really, it's not going to come to fruition and be what we all want it to be unless there's participation from everyone else out in the community. So, really excited about that. And the other thing is just making sure that people understand that tech and art aren't two separate things. We're trying to bring those two and merge those two things together. The first time that we really started to realize what this could be was about 6 years ago, when virtual reality first started coming out, and we were invited by the Boise Art Museum to come over and do to their gala and do a immersive art experience. So we found a local artist that does lots of amazing pieces, and we brought over a full VR setup to his house and said, hey, you got a month. Go into the VR. It was Tilt Brush at the time. I want you to create a piece of digital art. And a month later, he unveiled it at the event at the Boise Art Museum. And so there was all the patrons and the boosters and everyone there put on this headset, and they were taken into this really cool kind of black area when he first got in there. And then when he started it up, his digital piece of art was there, and it was one of those things that you're not just staring at it on the wall or on a pedestal in the middle of an art gallery. You're actually able to physically walk around it and walk into it and get underneath it if you wanted to lay on the floor and look up at it, or whatever you might want to. And then by the end of the night, since we had the original copy, we were able to hand over the controllers to anybody that wanted to come in there, and they could come in there and they could start marking up and making their own additions to the art piece. So it went from being just this sole piece that this artist created. Now it was a collaboration with the community and the patrons at the art museum. And I think that really helped people start to understand that, hey, VR technology isn't just sitting around and playing video games. It's actually so much more than that. And it opened the door for a lot of people, and you start to see a lot more digital artists now in VR. And that's something that's been really awesome to see unfold. We've also been lucky enough at Black Box. We had a sister company called the Idaho Virtual Reality Council. And so in about 4 years, we were able to put about 35,000 people through VR experiences. And so we started, we have kids, and we did it at nursing homes. We put everybody that we could through this stuff just to see how they reacted. One, we wanted to have our own learnings for Black Box. And two, our greater goal is to just introduce the technology to the community. And again, let people know that, yes, you can play games in it, but you can use it for architecture, you can use it for art, you can use it for education and healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. And over the years, we were able to help people understand, one, what virtual reality is, because most people didn't know, and if they did have an experience with it, at least up until the last year, it was like a Google Cardboard and very lo-fi. And now, years later, there's a lot more people that know what it is, that engage with it on a regular basis, that do meetings in it from work. And really, what that brings us back to is just how where that technology is helping people tell their own story. It's helping people preserve their memories and their stories, so that they can pass it on to loved ones. Kind of another lo-fi but very meaningful kind of example for this is there was a gal that reached out to us, I think it was 5 years ago, and her husband had about 3 weeks left to live. He had cancer, he was in hospice, he was at the house, and he had some little kids, and he used to be a river guide. And his one bucket list thing he wanted to do with his kids is he wanted to take them on a guided raft trip down the stretch of the river that he used to take people on over a couple, it was a two day trip. and he was too sick to take his kids. And so Jim and I kind of collaborated, came up with an idea. And Jim used to be a river guide as well. So we sent Jim. Jim went with a 360 camera mounted on top of his helmet, and he floated that entire stretch that the kid's father used to float. And then we took that video footage and we put it on a bunch of different devices, and we brought it to his house. And the dad and the kids and the wife were all able to sit down in the same room, put on a headset, and float the river and have 360. Felt like they were there without getting wet. And they got to experience that with their dad, and then he passed away a couple days later. But what we did was allow those kids to have a shared experience with their father, him passing down memories and stories to his children that they will never forget. And it just sets a precedent. I mean, as Kathleen will tell up there with everything that she's doing, since she's a digital embalmer. I mean, really, there's a lot of people in the community and her, and we've talked about this a little bit. The future is going to be crazy when we start to think about how we preserve ourselves, how, a grandchild might be able to, hear a story that their grandpa is telling when he's, 30 years old, and they can physically walk around him, get close to him, and it's almost like he's really there. And that's, it's creepy in a way, but it's amazing in a lot of ways too. I want to see my grandpa when he was 30. I'd love my kids, to see me as well. So, the future is going to be, crazy. What our perception of real and not real is definitely going to change. And so again, I just encourage every single person here, before we open this up to kind of Q&A, again, to participate in this project, have your minds blown along with ours, share stories, good or bad, and help us help you and everything else to make this project, really, really become what we all hope and want it to be over at Cyril's Place. So with that, Kathleen, I think you might have another slide or two in there if I'm forgetting something, but if not, then I think we can do Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. Chuck, thanks so much. You know what I love is like the human factor of Black Box. You guys have always presented and shown up so human first. And that's why I'm so excited to work with you all on this. And John, from everything you said too, there is such synergy, and we're all in sync, and we have the same and shared values here. So it's really great to see how this explores. How we explore this. So I know it's at least 10:48. I don't know timing. Can someone let me know how much time we have? Because did we start late? Are we going to 10:50? Where are we at?
We can probably go about another 5 to 7 minutes since we started late, and we can comp the Zoom meeting room that we're on right now does need to be used for another session by noon. So as long as we have a hard out by noon, we should be good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just think 10 minutes here. So we were going to open it up to Q&A after the three of us, John, Chuck, and myself, talked about these bullet points, but this is really generous for everybody. So John and Chuck, feel free to weigh in, but I was sort of thinking about, why this project and this sort of bridging together of unlikely fellows, it might seem from the outside, whether it's Indigenous peoples and the neurodivergent community, whether it's the art and the tech community, which is not unlikely, but to some folks, everybody stays very insular down their lane. But the big obvious is like what the last year and a half's been for all of us. I have never once been so grateful that in a unfortunate pandemic, and I lost my own mother to COVID during this time, that in an unfortunate pandemic that the whole world shares this grieving, and yet the whole world now knows the word virtual. And for the first time, people have said to me, and while virtual is being used differently, like virtual conferencing, at least there's an entree in. And people finally have said, Kathleen, wow, we finally think we know what you do. I'm like, oh boy, it's taken 25 years to get here. So the C word and what it did for all of us. I'm, John and Chuck, feel free to weigh in on what it's done for you both, since this is the world we've been in forever anyway. How has it changed? That's my question to both of you.
Well, I mean, at first, it gave me the opportunity to just walk out to my desk and work in my underwear right after I woke up. So that was, that was great for a little bit. But then after I got through the depression stage, then I put my pants back on and we went to work like we were supposed to. But no, I mean, that's the big thing. We got rid of our complete office downtown at Black Box because everybody was working at home, and we were already working with immersive technologies and things like that. So, for us, it wasn't that big of a deal. Everyone kept working, everybody kept talking, everybody kept getting up, putting on their VR headsets and joining each other with our virtual avatars and little meeting groups and whiteboarding sessions and stuff. So, for us, I think it was probably less of an adjustment than it probably was for a lot of other people who are, used to more formal means of communication. But I mean, how did it change for you, John?
Yeah, it was great. I hate to say it any other way. I feel bad saying it that way. In 2008, when the bubble burst in the or the real estate market, if you remember that, it was a great time for us, right? Physical architecture, that argument I put in there had changed, it busted. We actually thrive under stress in my profession. I hate to say it any other way. 2008, huge economic crash. We have architects who can't get jobs, buildings aren't happening. I developed $30 million of research that year, right? Pandemic hits. We have professors now having Zoom sessions and actually can run a Zoom session for the first time ever, like has already been talked about. The world knows about virtual. It's exploding. We need virtual conferences. We need to connect, right? It wasn't this question of, oh, in 5 years, we'll take this a little more serious. It's like, we need to do this now, right? There's people out there. There's still networks out here. And, human nature is we don't want to give up what we know for that future thing that may give us more than we have now, right? And that's kind of what happened with this pandemic is we had to give it up a bit, right? And so in my world, yeah, it's elevated the conversation heavily within the world, and yeah, it's a boom time right now, actually.
Yeah. So the other bullet points on here we have talked about and we have covered. So I do want to see if there's any Q&A, but I want to highlight an important the dates, the last bullet point. So on behalf of the XR Stories project, on October 11th, which is Indigenous Peoples Day, we will be facilitating a workshop inviting the community inside a virtual experience at Searles Place to then introduce the community to what we will be doing in our final representation of this art piece on November 5th. So I just want to point out that I want to extend the Hackfort and Tech community to come over to virtual Searles Place, and we'll send out, Eventbrite links for that on October 11th. And then from there also on November 5th. So I'm super excited to see how those unfold. And John, you were at the house already beginning a bunch of scans, which I'm excited to see. So we're in the infancy. Everybody's in this with us in real time. So I don't know if there's any Q&A. You guys can facilitate that or let me know. And I can't see it. If
Who has
there's
a question, anybody?
anyone, your avatars have a question? Chuck, what was the platform, by the way, that you guys used for your, design sessions or your sprints or your meetings that you guys pivoted to? Because I'm sure it wasn't Slack only.
No, lately we've just been using on the Quest 2. They have, was it Workplace or whatever it is that's on there, and so we just utilizing that. And it's kind of funny because your avatar looks a little bit like cartoony, but it still looks like you, and like the mouth, like it mimics what you're saying, and the eyes close and stuff. So it's actually really fun. And I mean, what's awesome about those, if you guys haven't tried it, or if you guys want to try it, is you can bring up whiteboards, you can share your screen, and you can bring in people that don't have VR headsets and just do their video calls, like Zoom pictures as well. So you can still all be together in those rooms. Because one thing that people do lose out on when you're not around is there's all that like serendipitous, ideation that happens when you're in a room together with people. So sometimes if you're just slacking back and forth or you're emailing back and forth, you lose out on those opportunities to come up with bright ideas or brainstorm and things. And so some of these platforms are really helping people to kind of have those same relationships and those same interactions that they used to have when they were, back at the office place.
So quick question, between Workplace, Altspace, and Mozilla Hubs, is there a preference for you? Because we might solicit that for our October 11th event.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm gonna have to get back into all three of those. I think the most I've spent has been in the Oculus one, so obviously I'm favorable to that one. But
Yeah. Well, if nobody has any questions, it's 10:55. Want to give the team time to ramp for the next talk. And I super appreciate both of you participating, being there in physical form, making this meta tribrid experience real, whatever real is. And if you guys have any sort of parting thoughts or anything that you'd like to share, please. It's been great to be able to present here.
Well, yeah, I'm never short for words, but it's a new definition of reality, I think, that we all have to come up with. And this idea that the virtual isn't real is not the case at all, right? It changes us emotionally from the music we hear. Most of our world is virtual in many ways, right? So something is real if it has an impact on reality, right? And so we have to question XR storytelling, in particular in the virtual world, because it's defined right now as not real, right? And that term real is just a new real for humanity, and that's going to change us forward, right? There's a different reality we're walking into, and that's when we get to see the mirrored reflection of what we think that reality is. Reality is going to be talking back to us already, but even more so.
Yeah, I'm just gonna footnote that with two ideas. One is, how are you going to feel when you walk into a room and the room knows you before you walk in? And two, I'm going to sit down in a virtual world to dinner with you while you're eating pasta bolognese, and I'm the one that can taste it. So if that begins to suss out how we begin to feel all of our senses, that's what we're aiming for. So with that, I thank you guys, and thanks everybody at Hackfort.
Thank you all very much. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, John. Thanks, Kathleen.
Yep.
You know,
yeah.
So to the point of these two events, searlsplace.org, you can go on there, sign up for our newsletter. We can hit you up with when these happen, and just keep an eye on that. And thank you all very much. Pretty amazing.
Thank you.
soon as Eric gets in this room, oh, there he is. So we're going to start with
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming to Hackfort 2021. I'm Sean Wakely, I'm the director of Hackfort. Our next speaker, unfortunately, they couldn't come this year due to certain global things that are going on, which is totally fine. But they are also a huge sponsor of Hackfort. They've been so great the last few years. This one's called, if you're reading this, it's already too late. Ransomware in 2021. Eric Herring did a pre-recorded video for us to watch, and then he will be on Zoom at the end of this Zoom Q&A. So I do have Dylan here with a mic. So if you have a question, we need to make sure to get it on the microphone so he can hear you guys. So anyways, please enjoy, and thank you guys so much.
Hey there, thanks for having me today. My name is Eric Herring. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Vinyl, and we are going to talk about ransomware today. Ransomware is out there in the world. It's a thing that everybody needs to be aware of because it has been getting increasingly more prevalent as a cybersecurity threat, and it's going to continue to do so. We talk to our clients about this stuff all the time as we're revisiting the way they put their security together and the way they tackle these problems. I'm really excited to talk to you today, and I'm really excited to answer your questions. The title of this talk is, if you're reading this, it's already too late. And the truth is, most people's experience of ransomware really is that they don't know they have it, or their company has been attacked until they're actually seeing a screen that says all their files have been encrypted, which is not a great day for anyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what ransomware is, how it actually works, and then we're going to talk a little bit about kind of how we got to today and what we can expect to happen in the future with ransomware. So all ransomware has roughly 6 phases, and we're going to go through them all in a little bit of detail. And like I said, anybody who has questions, I encourage that because all the different kinds of ransomware are slightly different, but at the end of the day, they all have to get on your network. They all have to infect the computers on your network and spread out. They have to persist onto your network. They have to infiltrate you so that if you reboot all your computers, when the computers start up again, the ransomware will still be there. Then they have to figure out what it is you have they want to encrypt, they want to attack. Then they need to actually do the encryption. And there's some nuances in there. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And then they, of course, have to send you a delightful note telling you that if you want your files back, that you're going to need to send them some Bitcoin. So step 1, they got to get a program onto your computer. Now, it turns out that well over half of the instances of ransomware dropper programs, these are called, the initial program that kicks off, are distributed via phishing. That is not really surprising. People will click on anything, it turns out. Research has shown time and again. But more and more, companies are putting measures in place to make it so that that is harder. The interesting evolution here is that that has spawned an entirely new set of actors in these criminal gangs called initial access brokers. And these initial access brokers basically only sell one thing, and they get paid very well for it. And the thing that they sell is a way onto your network. And that can be by, subverting your people, paying them to leave the door unlocked, as it were. It can be via attacking open networking ports on your network. or it can be via phishing campaigns that are conducted for the purposes of saving the access away to sell it on later to one of these ransomware games. The next step after that is the dropper program runs. So what does that do? That calls back out to the mothership and it downloads the really nasty stuff. And what I mean by that is it goes and gets the program that actually crawls across your network and slithers around, as I like to say, getting itself into all the nooks and crannies so that it can then survey all of your data. This typically also involves talking, again, to the mothership and getting a unique key for your enterprise, for your attack, as it were, because they're going to encrypt your files in a way that they can only be decrypted with your personally identified key. That's what they say. And
I think this one's on. We're going to get some feedback.
Is because the way
I love feedback on
used
my
to
guitar,
work
but not on my
is
microphones.
They would just encrypt it with one key. And so if somebody figured out the key, then they could render any attack from that particular ransomware ineffective. So the gangs got smart and they fixed that. The next step is the targeting, finding the files that are going to get
Year,
encrypted.
we've had some great
And this can
conversations.
take some time.
But
they can be in your network
anyways, thanks for
days,
coming
weeks,
to Hackfort
sometimes
2021.
months, as
Super
they
happy to have you
root
guys
around
here. We have some fun
trying to
programming
get more and more
today. I
access.
highly recommend you check out the
And
expo hall
sometimes this is
too. There's a lock
undirected.
picking workshop. There's a bunch of cool, fun stuff, hands-on things that you guys can check out. But anyways, without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to David. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Also, at the end of this, we have a microphone that you can do some Q&A with. I have some volunteers.
And the fellow
Immersive experience studios, we're here to help. We're here to help you really leverage so that you can get that awesome user experience from 3D and spatial audio.
was not illegal. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act didn't exist. None of the cybersecurity framework of laws existed. It was a much, much earlier time. And so he didn't even get in trouble. He just made some people mad. Now, roll camera forward, and we are in the 2000s. And suddenly, everything is connected to the network. I mean, not suddenly, obviously, it happened over time, but from the perspective of this timeline, everything is suddenly connected to the network. And so that made botnets possible. And this audience has probably heard about various forms of malware that spread through automated networks called botnets that just sit and look for vulnerable hosts. And at some point, the people who controlled those botnets realized that they could maybe use them to make some money instead of just spreading software around. Most of you probably don't remember the Morris worm, but that was the first one of these. And that was actually not intended to harm anyone. Now, it turned out it shut the entire internet down. So the guy who released it did not accomplish his goal of not harming anyone. And he got in pretty serious trouble, but he wasn't intending to extort money or anything. By the 2000s, that had all changed. The people who ran these things were doing it for profit. And so the programs got a little bit more sophisticated every year. And at some point, encryption came into it. And so they would not only block access to your computer and overwrite the master boot sector or whatever, whatever technical means they used to tell you they were going to erase your computer. At some point, they actually grabbed your data and encrypted it. And so it continued until about 2015, 2017, somewhere in there. It was very artisanal. It was very one-to-one. There was not a lot of organized criminal activity around it. I mean, it was certainly carried out by organized crime in certain cases, but they were not collaborating with one another, and they certainly had no state sponsorship. And honestly, it was usually, some fellow in his basement launching these attacks. That all changed around 2017. And the reason it changed is because suddenly there was a marketplace for these things. Some of you have probably heard the term script kiddies, used derisively by people who talk about malware and viruses and whatnot. And a script kiddie is somebody who is not a skillful hacker, which is why it's not a compliment. They download scripts from the internet and run them and accomplish things like gaining access to your computer or breaking into your shared drive or something like that. Well, what happens when you have very sophisticated malware like this ransomware, and you have the ability to just go and download it from the internet? And what happens further when you create what is essentially an affiliate model? I'm going to talk about that in a second. This is big money, and it's big volume. I'm not going to throw a bunch of numbers at you, but this slide is super interesting to me because it tells the following story. In 2016 and years prior, there were a lot of attacks. This graph is a graph of attacks, number of attacks in millions. And there were a lot of attacks. That's because the robots were just roaming the internet and they were attacking everyone. They were knocking on every door. And if they slipped in, then they would do whatever it was they were sent there to do, these programs. And they weren't super sophisticated for the most part, although they were getting there. But then something changed. And I think what changed is people started paying attention, because in 2017, the number of attacks went down drastically. And that's not because people were less interested in breaking into computers. It's because the humans put their hands on the steering wheel and they started picking their targets instead of just letting the robots roam the internet. And you can see 17, 18, 19, you can see, again, this is a story I think this data tells. Other people disagree, I'm sure. But what I think this says is they spent those 3 years really figuring this out and figuring out how to pick good targets, good soft targets. So companies that did not have sophisticated security in place, that could afford to pay the ransomware, and that weren't going to cause a target to be painted on the people who were attacking them, right? So for example, you wouldn't want to go after a nuclear reactor. that would be bad. You know, unless of course you are a nation state, and then it's called Stuxnet. And it's only okay, I guess, if you go after not the US, not Canada, not Europe, et cetera. But I think they figured it out, because in 2020, it really ticked up hard. And also, you're going to see this story is borne out by the dollars that flowed, right? This was not big money in 2015, 2016, 17, 18. Even in 2019, it wasn't super big money. In 2019, it was, you know, essentially $500,000 an occurrence. In 2020, with those 304 million attacks, there were $406.3 million equivalent of cryptocurrencies exchanged. And by the way, that's worth a lot more now, you know, than it was. Actually, it depends on the day. So Bitcoin just lost a lot of value. You know what? It doesn't matter. It's a lot of money. And that trend appears to be continuing in 2021. So the average in 2020 was $1.5 million per payment occurrence. And so the final piece of this story, and the reason I draw the conclusions I draw, is that you can see the breakdown in the different kinds of malware. And so if you look at this slide closely, you'll see that Ryuk was essentially non-existent until 2019, and in 2020, it was a significant portion of the dollars exchanged, right? They call it revenue on this slide, which makes me laugh. But I guess it is, you know, if you're running a criminal enterprise like a business, you have revenue, and your revenue comes from people paying you these ransoms. You know, the whole model was pioneered in the Mexico kidnapping industry. I mean, other places as well, but we know it best because we're so close to the border. We know it best as what happens down in Mexico. And it was a whole system, right? The kids get kidnapped, you pay the ransom, the kids come home. Now all that started to break down, and I'm not going to get too far into that, but there's some interesting parallels there, and it's worth looking at what's happened to the kidnapping norms in Mexico and other places, and how that has evolved over time to get a clue about what's going to happen here with ransomware. So just like Ryuk was, you know, not prevalent at all in 2018, very prevalent in 2019, and dominant in 2020. If you look, the Sodinokibi did the same thing. Very small in 2019, much bigger in 20. It's already much, much bigger in 21. And it has another name. It's called Revil, for those of you who follow this news at all. And they're the ones who so famously said they would not target critical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, things like that. And they're the ones who disappeared in July. They're back now. They weren't gone long, but it's really interesting. And the reason I think it's most interesting is because these are all associated with state actors. Now, some of them are not sponsored, not that we can prove through attribution. But as you can see, like Russia is well represented in these different strains of ransomware. There's also Iran there, there's the Ukraine, but really we're talking about Russia. China hasn't really gotten into this game in any huge way, although they're using similar techniques. Their goals are not monetary. So they're not really covered here. They're primarily conducting espionage using similar technique. But the Russians, I mean, as I said to somebody today, maybe we shouldn't have been so aggressive about trying to get them to convert to capitalism, because they've embraced it in a big way. And just to round this piece of the talk out here, I'm going to talk about what that looks like, because these criminal gangs are organized. Whether they have state sponsorship or not, they have a business model. And so the ransomware developers, the people who actually make the software that does the bad thing to our networks, they don't actually run the compromise operations that get the software onto those networks. They have what they call affiliates. They call them affiliates. It's crazy. Like they're affiliate marketers for Herbalife or something. And those affiliates get the software onto these networks, oftentimes by going to these access brokers that I talked about briefly earlier, buying access. And then the victims, the targets that pay, they pay directly back to the developers, and the developers pay a commission to the affiliates. It really is a business model. It's frightening in its efficiency. And you can just go on, the dark web, which is a real thing. I'm doing scare quotes, but it really is a thing that you can go on to if you know how to do that. And you can troll around looking for a connection to these ransomware developers if you get it into your head that you want to become an affiliate. So the business model has spawned this targeting that I was talking about earlier, right? So there's now an ideal ransomware victim. And the main goals here in picking a ransomware victim are, like I said, that they can pay and that they don't paint a target on you. So the ransomware affiliates, they like US-based companies, organizations. They like organizations that make more than $100 million a year. They don't want, although they regularly hit, and you hear news stories about this all the time, they're doing their best not to target education, healthcare, government, nonprofit, all for similar reasons and also some differentiated reasons. But often, government and healthcare will absolutely get a target painted on your back. And education, nonprofit are just bad headlines. And they don't want that, again, because they're a business. No matter how you get there, this is what you end up with. For anybody who's never actually seen one of these ransomwares operating, this is the WannaCry decryption screen. And it tells you exactly what happened, exactly how much time you have left. There's literally a ticking clock. And it tells you how to go and get your Bitcoin if you need to go buy some Bitcoin. It tells you where to send it. Now, this is a very early one, right? This is from 2016, I want to say, 2015 maybe. And this particular variant was targeted at your personal machine, your personal Windows machine. And they only wanted $300 worth of Bitcoin, right? The price tag is much, much, much higher. So when you look at all of this together, when I look at all of this together, at least, I feel like 2020 was really the start of something new. And the reasons I feel that way are that, first off, nation states appear to be getting more involved. There's no question that the Russian FSB is a sponsor of several of these criminal gangs. In fact, the people running these various enterprises that are targeting our companies and organizations here in the US, they could very well be intelligence officers. The GRU had similar sponsorship, the Russian military intelligence had similar sponsorship of a group that was attributed. And those hackers that were in charge of that group were absolutely officers in the Russian army. The second thing is these criminals are working together. Like they have Slack or other chat programs where they get together and talk about the best ways to deploy ransomware. It's both terrifying and incredibly banal to my mind, because I think about the Slack groups I'm a part of, and we talk about this or that important thing, and then we post a meme and everybody laughs and talk about what we're going to do in the weekend. And I imagine they're doing the same thing. They are not hunkered down in a cave or in a burnout building somewhere anymore. They're just sitting in an internet cafe talking about how they're going to get millions of dollars from US corporations, US and Canada and Europe. Anybody who has money, right? But this is the US centric talk, and we are the primary target. And along with that, ransomware is a commodity now. You really can just go to the ransomware app store and buy some ransomware to deploy. There's all sorts of new attack vectors. You know, again, 2020 was a little bit of a watershed because suddenly, you know, again, it happened gradually, but it feels sudden when you look at the statistics. Suddenly our homes were smart. You know, my stove wants to be on the internet. It's never going to be, but it wants to be. And all sorts of other things want to be connected to the internet. And those are just additional targets. There's all sorts of, you know, VPN accesses and critical infrastructure that they can attack. So many things are on the internet that weren't even a few years ago. And the people who put them on the internet will tell you, you know, it's not dangerous. We've got security controls in place. It's very limited access. The important systems are air gapped. And that might even be true. But it's turned out in retrospect, when we look back at how these breaches happen, that it very often was not true, or at least not true enough, even though nobody was trying to do anything wrong. So, new attack vectors. Humans are guiding the attacks. This is very important. And it's important because to date, knock on wood, the computers have not replaced the humans as far as creativity goes. And so the fact that they can guide these attacks from afar without exposing themselves is a big, big deal. The attacks, like I said, are more highly targeted. That goes hand in hand with the fact that humans are increasingly behind them, the human in the loop kind of situation. And finally, they started doing what's called expanded extortion. The expanded extortion is kind of ingenious in an evil sort of way. You have to admire the creativity. What they basically do is double extort you. They encrypt your files, but they steal them first. And they say, if you don't pay, not only are they going to delete your files without decrypting them and giving them back to you, but they are going to expose them. They're going to share the information. And then from there, they went on to triple extortion, which is super exciting because then they go through and they find the people about whom the data, who are the subjects of the data, like the employees of your company, and they directly communicate with them and they say, hey, I'm going to release your data and you better go and tell your company that they should pay up. And then there's quadruple extortion, which is, you know, the height of extortion, I guess, at this point, until they figure out a new one. And that's where they actually communicate directly with your clients and other people whose data they might now be in possession of, or who have an interest in the security of your company. And they tell them that they're going to do this, that, or the other if they don't, you know, if your clients don't lean on you to pay the extortion. And often, by the way, they then, like every organized criminal gang, they make the expanded extortion victims, they tell them they have to pay as well. And so, you know, in the best case, I guess they could quadruple their payout if everybody paid. No, fortunately, that doesn't happen often. So that's all terrible and bad. So where does that leave us, right? Well, I think that the only long-term solution here is that companies actually have to have a better security posture. And that's unfortunate because I would say that while some companies know how to do that, we as a society, as a polity, we do not know how to do that. We undervalue security, we underinvest in security, and the security that we do deploy oftentimes is, you know, either neutral or harmful to the actual security posture of these companies. Again, this is not that talk. Maybe I'll do that one another time. So I'm just going to leave that as an assertion. I believe that to be true. Also, all the research to date is very clear that markets don't punish companies that have breaches. A couple of different studies spring to mind. One is a study about what happens to companies who have their trade secrets leaked. It turns out nothing happens to them on the whole. And individually, even the effects are negligible or non-existent. And when I say effects, I'm talking about effects to their stock price, the company valuation. It simply doesn't harm them. And ditto for companies that suffer data breaches of some kind. They're simply not harmed in the marketplace. Nobody cares as near as we can tell from the data. And again, that's unfortunate. A logical extension of that, I think, is there are millions of soft targets in the world. And they're soft in the sense that they can pay and they're underinvested in cybersecurity or overinvested in the wrong kind of cybersecurity. And so things are going to change. And I'm going to talk about what comes next in a minute. Things are going to change because we have a public good interest in getting rid of not only ransomware, but all of the other kinds of cyber activity using these same kinds of techniques. I mentioned earlier espionage and other kinds of information operations that use similar techniques. And so getting rid of the ransomware would also help us get rid of those. But there are many millions of soft targets in the world. And so even if we did 10% a year that took themselves off the list, they made the right decisions and they invested the right amount of money and they trained their people. Even if we did 10% a year, we're still going to be doing what we're doing, grinding through this ransomware whack-a-mole for well over a decade, right? And finally, cyber insurance. So I often get asked about cyber insurance, and I hope somebody wants to talk about it in the Q&A period, because it turns out that cyber insurance is not super helpful as far as stopping these attacks. Actually, cyber insurance is not super helpful in making companies more secure at all, because it turns out that everybody is interested in the cheapest solution. The insurance companies certainly are. They wanted to pay out the minimum amount. And the alternative to paying the ransom is actually taking the entire network offline and shutting down all the computers and finding the backups and restoring the backups and making sure you've kicked the bad people out. And that can take weeks or months. In certain large organizations, it can take years. And all during that time, the insurance company is going to be paying some amount of money, which is almost certainly going to be greater than the $1 million or $2 million or even $5 million that they pay out so that the ransom can be paid by the company. So perverse incentives, right? So what happens next? This is all my opinion. Other people share this opinion. So, this is a take it for what it's worth kind of situation. But I wanted to share, this is what I think happens next. So I think there's going to be an increase in sanctions, and regulatory activity. We've seen it already. If you've been following the news, a cryptocurrency exchange was just sanctioned by the Office of Foreign Currency, OFAC, and you can't send them money anymore, because they were brokering money for these ransomware gangs. They were accepting payments for these ransomware gangs, essentially. There was more to it than that, but it boils down to they thought they were part of this criminal enterprise. And so now they're sanctioned. And sending money to them is roughly the same thing as sending money to a terrorist. And so you can't do that. And other things like that are going to happen. President Biden just had a big speech where he was talking about this kind of stuff, and a portion of it was dealing with these kinds of cyber events. So the politicians are going to get involved, the bureaucrats are going to get involved, and they're all going to try and do stuff to make this better. And some of it's going to make it better, and some of it's going to make it worse, as usually happens with any seriously complex situation that we try and solve with laws and regulations and nudges and kind of collective governmental action. By the way, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do that. I think everything that's going to happen needs to happen. It's just, I'm telling you, it's going to be messy. I think a lot of people are going to start talking about criminalizing the victims for paying ransom, for communicating with the ransomware operators and other things. I think that's going to get a little crazy if past experience is any indicator. I think there's going to be all sorts of calls amongst the political class, as well as journalists and private citizens. There's going to be all sorts of calls for direct action against these people who are attacking our companies. And I wrote this bullet point in this way very deliberately, right? And I think I will share with you, I don't think that turning criminal economic activity into a military attack for the purposes of sending drones after these criminal gangs is a good idea. But I think people are certainly going to advocate it, and it may even happen. I think that cyber insurance is going to change significantly for all the reasons I talked about earlier. And it's going to change the fundamental equation about how you mitigate your risks in a company. If you're in charge of security, you may already be seeing this if you're renewing policies for cyber insurance. And finally, I think that companies are going to do their best to make all this stop. Some of them anyway, right? The top 10%, if my previous equation was correct, I think they're going to try and make it stop, or at least do enough so that the board of directors thinks they're trying to make it stop. And I think everybody should remember that if you don't make things secure and usable, the users are going to make them usable and insecure. And so that is just another game of whack-a-mole waiting to happen off of things. So that's it. That's what ransomware is, how we got here, and what's coming up. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Anyone talking to the mic?
Hey, thanks so much for doing this. It was really fascinating. How many of these kind of exploits, how many of these are like 0-day exploits over, just old non-patch systems that they're getting into? And how much of this could be improved by like upgrading actual hash functions that are being used instead of using, older antiquated ones, actually getting like future-proof, whatever SHA-2, SHA-3, things like that. Can you speak to all that a little bit?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So I don't think we have any terribly good data on that. I certainly don't have any terribly good data on that to hand. I'm sure some of the research firms could answer this question better. And I might be able to by digging through the research reports. But I think the spirit of your question is, if we were doing all the stuff we should already be doing, would everyone be safer? And the answer is absolutely yes. If you go and look at the ransomware cheat sheets, every organization has one. You can get one from the FBI, you can get one from CISA, you can get one from your insurance carrier. Every one of them says, do the things you already know you should do, right? Make sure you have a backup that's tested. Make sure you're using multi-factor authentication if it's appropriate. Make sure that you have password complexity rules, which I don't agree with, but it's one of the things that we're told we need to do, et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, we'd all be a lot better off if we were not such soft targets. So, everybody should definitely leave this talk and go and do all of those things in their enterprise networks. And that would be that would make this day considerably more gloomy for the criminals.
Cool. Hand the mic to you and you keep it until the next question.
So you talked about how a lot of these ransomware are kind of Russian sponsored, and I'm kind of curious your opinion on how much of that is actually the Russian state wanting to be involved in ransomware, or that's more just that ransomware actors go to the Russian state because they seem to have more of a policy of, as long as you're not targeting .ru addresses or something, that will kind of turn a blind eye to it.
My opinion is that it's much more the latter. I don't think that any of this activity is terribly important to Putin, in the sense that if it became advantageous for him to roll these people up and put them in a truck and drive them across the border to hand to the FBI, he would absolutely do that. Probably not his army officers, right? They would just, suddenly have different names and be somewhere else and we'd never find them. But the civilian criminals, if it was in his interest, he would just, hand them over in a heartbeat. This is not a leg of their cyber strategy per se, but I think we can see through his, now we're getting the geopolitics, right? But I think we can see through his actions across the board about everything, that when he's in an oppositional stance, he welcomes chaos. And that's an old KGB tactic, and he has continued it. So this causes chaos, and he's happy about that. He doesn't mind it. And as long as the chaos is happening outside of the sphere of influence that he cares about, not targeting anybody that he is under his protection, primarily bothering us and the other, Western democracies, he's going to provide a safe haven. Even after that changes, and it will change sooner or later, it'll be in Russia's interest not to be a haven for the hoi polloi of these criminal gangs. They'll only provide haven for the ones that actually are state sponsored and carrying out state sponsored activities. There'll be other havens, right? Russia just happens to be that place right now. It's the wild, wild west for the purposes of being a ransomware actor. These are great questions, by the way. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Sorry, this was just one more for you. Excuse me.
No, please.
These are older criminal organizations. Are they moving more toward this kind of area? Are cartels doing this? Are I don't know, the mob or something? I don't know. Getting more into this side of things then, and you're talking about that ransomware as a service.
So I don't have good data on that particular question. I mean, I presume the answer is in some sense yes, but it's probably more like, when Ford funds a startup from inside Ford, and gives them separate office space and a checking account with a certain amount of money in it to go and do some specific thing, right? It's probably more in that vein if it's happening at any scale, because the people who carry out this activity have a different set of skills than the people who go and collect envelopes of cash from business owners. I'm not saying nobody can make that leap, but this is a blue collar, white collar divide, just like we've seen in many other industries, to my mind, actually. And so, to the extent that these more traditional organized crime gangs are getting involved in it, they're doing that by inviting new blood into the organization for the purposes of carrying out these new types of activities, if that makes sense.
Any more questions? Awesome, Eric. Oh, we are seeing chat questions pop up. I don't know if anybody's reading those.
Oh. Let's do it.
Hello, hello. Okay, so a question in the chat says, do you think this new Chinese ban on crypto will negatively affect ransomware actors and their ability to keep attacking?
That, I guess, is the $64,000 question, right? Or I guess today it's like a $42,000 question, something like that. I haven't looked at the price of Bitcoin today. I don't know. What's going on in China, and I want to be clear, I'm venturing out on territory that I don't have as firm a footing as I do talking about, bits and bytes. But I think what I'm about to say is true enough, and that is that China is not trying to kill cryptocurrency per se. They're trying to control it. The decentralization is the enemy of the CCP, and it's anathema to their worldview and the type of society that they want to build. If you read their 50-year plan, and I think everyone should, by the way, read the actual 50-year plan, and there's a couple of good books about it as well. It's clear to see that they prefer order and centralization over chaos and decentralization, certainly within their borders. And so I don't think it's targeted at that, and I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. Honestly, everybody's dancing around on Twitter talking about how it's going to zero because China banned it. And yeah, there's 5 billion people there, and they're not going to be trading cryptos. There's still 6 and change billion people in the rest of the world. So I'm not too worried about it. I mean, worried, I guess, is the wrong word, because that would actually be a good thing if they killed the ability to pay. But I'm not concerned about that as an outcome. I don't think it's a high likelihood outcome.
Are there any more chat questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Eric. I know Sean's somewhere around here, and I'm sure he'd thank you very much and appreciate your time. So excellent. Any more questions? Awesome. Okay.
Thanks everyone for coming and listening.
Awesome. John.
Eric, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your support. And although you weren't here in person, it was really, really
room, canyon, whatever, and we need some music. So it just so happens that the producer is a really big EDM fan, so they just throw some EDM music in there, right? So now you're in the situation, right? I don't know, you're in a room somewhere in a cave, there's bad guys, whatever, and you're hearing the, and you're like, okay, so how does this music fit with what's going on here, right? Somebody's about to die, right? We're in this really scary situation. Difficult to hear over the sound design. I see this a lot in film, cinema broadcasts, where you've just got all this sound effects, right? Music, rumble, rumble, battlefield going on and stuff, right? And there's music somewhere in there, right? But you can't really hear it because the sound effects are just completely obliterating this music, right? Here's my recommendation. Pull out a spectrogram, figure out where all of the sound effects are happening. Chances are it's all low frequency stuff, right? And reproduce, rearrange, orchestrate your music so that it's happening where the sound effects are not. It's a little bit more work, but that will give you biggest bang for your buck. The sound effects have their place in the mix. The music has its place in the mix. Everybody's happy. And then lastly, audio cuts. I see this problem a lot as well. Crossfading is your friend. Hard cuts are not. If you have a scene where there's music playing, there's sound effects going on, and then suddenly the music stops, that's really, really jarring for the listener, right? You want to, at most, crossfade it out and crossfade something else in, right? Or you want to have some way to gracefully pull the audio out if it's music or sound effects. You don't want things to just suddenly stop, because that, again, will break the experience for the listener. Okay. Thank you for hanging in there. I realize it's a lot of information. There's way more where that came from. I really tried to boil it down to just the essential things that you need to know as a consumer or as a developer. If you'd like copies of these slides, please head out to our site, immersiveexperiencestudios.com, contact us. Just need your email and just give me a single line that says, Hackfort 2021. Happy to share these with you. I have an online class that I'm developing with some partners, some business partners back in California. And that will be online about beginning of the year, where we'll go into this stuff in way more detail. Actually have some projects that you can download and actually work on for yourself. We'll cover all of these audio solutions in great detail. We expect that to be done sometime around beginning of the year. I can give you information about that if you're interested in that course. We also have a free guide, how to deliver a compelling experience through 3D and spatial audio. You can get that at our website, immersiveexperiencestudios.com. About halfway down the page, there's a little thing that says get the guide. You can click on it, get that for free. And if you'd like to stay in touch, David Reyes at immersiveexperiencestudios.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and on YouTube. And then some additional resources. This first one, Art and Science of Sound Recording. These are my two business partners, Alan Parsons and Julian Kolbeck. This is an amazing resource. I've used this a couple of times to train some offshore teams in audio production, audio reproduction techniques. It's a really, really great way to understand audio production in a real nuts and bolts way. It's not specific to spatial audio. The spatial audio class will be an adjunct to this, but this is really great if you want to really understand, how do I mix music? How do I record music? How do I master music? How do I develop sound effects? How do I know that I'm doing this correctly? This is a really, really great resource. It is accurate and it is really, really clear. The Ambisonics book, which I have here, this is a really awesome read. It's a nice blend between technical and theory and practical. It's available online for free. I bought mine just because I like to have the hard copy, but you can get that online for free. Dolby, of course, has a number of training resources. Again, it's a complicated solution, so if you're going to dive into the world of Atmos, give yourself some time if you're on a project or you're thinking about a project to really ramp up on the technology, go through all their tutorials. They've got some good stuff. It's getting better. We work with them, actually. And then Oculus. Oculus has a really awesome developers site, which has a lot of really, really great information. They do a nice job. Audio Engineering Society, if you're a math and science geek like me, you want to dig into the math and some of the artwork of this 3D and spatial audio, highly recommend that. There's no end to the papers you can read about spatial audio and 3D audio, ambisonics, and the like. Lastly, Unreal has this online demo called the Spatial Audio Temple. This is a really great example of audio in Unreal. I think it's really, really well done. It's a live, online site with some great examples, some downloadable projects, lots of good documentation about Unreal. And then lastly, about us, right? We're here to help. We're located here in the Treasure Valley. We really love the community. We really think that 3D and spatial audio are a game changer. It can be used for anything from podcasts to social to VR to mobile. We're here to help. I want to say thank you for hanging in there with us. Have a great show. Have a great afternoon. And I'll be around after the presentation if you want to catch up, talk about this a little bit more.
We do have a couple minutes. Are you open to doing any Q&A, David?
Oh, sure.
Awesome. Folks, do we have any questions in the room for David?
So I have a question about producing spatial audio. And so I'm not a developer, but I make audio art and podcasts.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, like, now when I create a scene, I'll use, like, say, a binaural mic and just set it in a place, get stereo audio. It sounds kind of spatial, but when you move your head, it doesn't follow your head. It doesn't do head tracking.
Right.
So do you, when you're trying to record a scene like that, that would support head tracking,
right?
Do you use a binaural mic? Do you use a specialty mic that is like directional on several? Like,
I see what you're saying.
How do you do that?
Yeah. What kind of microphone do you use now?
I have for that, I have like a 3DO binaural mic, the one with like the little silicone ears.
Okay. So it's an ambisonic mic then, and it gives you audio out. It gives you audio out in A format or B format? Do you know?
No, it's just like stereo.
Oh,
So
I
it's
got
just
you.
a stereo
Just stereo
microphone.
mic. Yeah. Okay. So you're trying to record, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're trying to record, you want to record spatial audio for your application, right? Which I
Yeah,
think you
say
said was
for a podcast.
for a
or something.
podcast, right? Okay. So there are a number of ambisonic microphones out there, and I can give you my contact info. If you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to give you a list of them. You know, Sennheiser has one. Rode has one. There's a number of them, right? Zoom has a device, a portable recording device that does ambisonics, right? So I think your first question is how to record ambisonic audio. You have to use an ambisonic mic, right? That's a first order ambisonic. It's got 4 microphones, right, to record the sound, coincident mics. Then for head tracking, now head tracking, you can do a couple of different ways. So, for example, Waves has a device that you would clip on to, you know, your headset or your earphones, whatever, right? It's a Bluetooth device that will record head tracking information as you make your audio recording, right? So that's one way to do it, right? If you have a headset, like a VR headset, if you're using that in your application, right, you can also use that to do head tracking, right? Another way to do it is in the actual audio production itself. You can add automation information about the head tracking, although that's not quite as accurate, right? So first is use an ambisonic mic to truly capture the sound field in a 360 format, right? And the second is have some sort of device where you can record head tracking information. I think that was your question.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a live rendering of head tracking, right? In the case of like a VR or an AR application, right, where you want to track what the user is doing at that moment as far as their head tracking, that's a little different. That is something that you would build in using the game engine, where you build in like state information, right? Like if the user turns to the left, you know, you want to do this with the audio. If they turn to the right, you want to do this with the audio. You know, if they pan really, really fast or really, really slow, those are use cases that you can account for as you're building your experience in a game engine.
Yeah,
Did
and
that-
so
go ahead.
that answers my question definitely,
Okay.
because I think what's interesting about it to me is that with those binaural stereo mics, you get so much accurate. It
Yeah.
sounds really accurate
Yep.
information of the room.
True.
And I was wondering with ambisonic mics,
Yep.
are you getting that accurate of spatial information?
Yeah, you are.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's some theory behind that, right? So I want to, again, I'm not trying to overwhelm you with theory and
No,
math,
sure.
right? But there is a theory, right? It goes all the way back to, I'm just gonna give you a little bit on this, right? Because I'm such a geek for this stuff. I'm gonna go back to here. So you notice down in the bottom left-hand corner, we didn't really talk about this, right? So this timeline for ambisonics really begins in 1931, believe it or not, with this gentleman named Blumlein, who was the guy who filed the first patents around stereophony, right? So if you think about 2-channel stereo, that's where all that came from, right? And so what he determined was that if you take 2 microphones and place them coincident like this, there's some math behind that, right? You can capture, they call it MS or XY, you can capture a certain amount of information around the sound field. That theory is then expanded to include these 4 virtual mics, which is how you capture, which is how ambisonics came to be, right? It was built off of this original theory. So the answer to your question is 2 mics, you could have 50 mics, right? Which is cool, but that won't really capture the sound field in an ambisonic manner. You really need an ambisonic microphone because of the way the sound capsules for the microphone are placed. And they're placed in such a way where, again, you're capturing the directional information of the sound field and not so much just the sound sources themselves. When you get that, you then get a file that gives you these 4 tracks of audio, right? W, X, Y, and Z. And that's how you determine, that's how you can then process it to really create a 360 field.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and there are some inexpensive ambisonic mics. You don't have to spend a lot of money, right? I mean, you can, right? If you want to spend $2,000 on an ambisonic mic, you certainly can. You can get an ambisonic mic for, $200, $300, $400, all the way up to, like I said, a couple of $1,000, right? And then you need some software, right? You need some software to then take it, bring it into a DAW or a game engine, right? Process it, work with it.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, that answers.
What do
my
you use
question.
for a DAW? Do you have like Pro
Yeah, I
Tools?
use Pro Tools.
Pro
yeah.
Tools? Okay.
Yeah.
You use Pro Tools, latest version? I figure it's called Pro Tools.
I think it's the
Ultimate?
version from last year.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so Pro Tools supports Dolby Atmos out of the box, right?
Cool,
Pro Tools
yeah.
Ultimate. But if you don't want to use Pro Tools, you don't have to, because all these other solutions have plugins, right? So like, for example, Resonance Audio, right? With the exception of Envelop, Resonance Audio has their own plugin, right? So you can use that.
Gotcha. Cool.
But yeah, definitely, I've got some cards up here if you want to grab
Yeah,
one.
I'll send you an
I'm happy to
email,
stay in touch with you and help you out wherever I can. Yep.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. Sure.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you guys. Let's give David a big hand and thank him for his time.
Thank you, guys. And I'll probably be back next year with some more examples of this, right? I want to do kind of a series of these because there's a lot to talk about. I really tried to just give you in this presentation, enough information where you can go out there and start working with this technology, right? Or when you're looking for it, if you're consuming it, you really know what you're looking for.
Sports program can be and is, Boise State really has an amazing program, and it's just been so great to
And
collaborate.
about being a husband and father, and
Yeah, a mentor, kind of.
yeah, really, that's what I'm aiming for.
But anyways, Chris, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much, and we will have time for Q&A. I'll have one of the volunteers with a microphone. We are recording this, so definitely ask your question on the mic, and we're here to help. Thank you so much, Chris. Doc.
You bet. All right, let's kick it off with this. When people ask what in the world we do, this is what we do.
There goes a huge shatter onto Fresno now. Get the follow-up. Get them down there. Well, Plato certainly not thrown off there by taking out Seguru and Sliver as well. Boise State. Look at that shot, though, onto Tracer. Then both teams are still even at 5. There's the pick onto Seguru. Goblin getting a double, coming through in clutch with a triple for Boise State. That is a huge hold there. Now here comes Boise State trying to even it back up. Oh, look at that double diva bomb.
Fresno State does the same thing as we get that retired start. And a huge double kill. Come out, plus a two-man shatter onto both tanks for UNLV. The both get booped off the edge. Farmer's got to hold on to it. It's a huge rocket barrage.
That's going to be a double onto Wild Queen and QWERTY through the windows here. That barrage there is going to pick up a double, and they're going to burn their blizzard for nothing there.
Taking fairly low. There's the ESP going to land on the 5. They'll trade off 1 for 1. QWERTY's the next one to be taken out of the mech. He'll get burned down as well.
Going to be using, they're bringing out the Nano Blade combo, but he gets hit with the sleep dart. Being able to hit that sleep dart onto the Nano Blade itself, who gets taken out by Plato. Fresno State has a huge barrage coming through with a double there from Goblin. Out by a flame strike though, but Pelt evens it up by taking out Shikame. Now Holy Hunter and Robin also eliminated. Boise State is still 1 up, now 2 up in this fight. It is an overtime. They focus down to Guru. That's it, Broncos. Using that primal rage from QWERTY there. And there goes the default back. Boise State, you have taken down Goliath. You are the Mountain West champion.
Okay, so what I thought I would do is kind of introduce you to really the world that you already know, by just telling a couple of stories about how we do what we do and giving you some insight into what it is that collegiate esports really is all about. And it's actually, spoiler, you already know it. It's the same that softball, the volleyball, the football, the basketball have always done, which is to grab great talent, bring them in, teach them a little bit more, and see what we can accomplish together in the name of a shared goal and institution, which is education. If you want to reach out to me, that's the way to do it. I am a head coach of esports, and I am the head coach of 5 games: League of Legends, Overwatch, Rocket League, Valorant, and our now two-time national champion Madden player. We won 3 national championships last year, 2 in Madden, 1 in Overwatch, and we're widely considered a top 5 program in the nation in most circles, always on the top 10 list. But I think it's important for you to have a sense of what it is that we do, because it's really not that different from the other things that you know. As a coach, I'm responsible for preparing our students to be successful. That means in class, but also competitively against the other teams that we play. We're, of course, in the Mountain West athletically, and so we borrow that construct and try to play the other teams in our conference as much as possible. Our conference has actually jumped in and made it possible for us to have a conference championship. We've participated in it each of the last 4 years that they've done it. And we have a total of 4 conference championships across the multiple games. We haven't won them all, which is good news. We won a competitive conference. Colorado State's pretty dang good. UNLV is pretty dang good. And I'll tell you a little bit about them today too. Nevada, San Diego State, San Jose State actually took a Valorant team to the international event that was happening over in Europe this summer. Pretty amazing stuff. When we look at collegiate esports, you know, we were joking a little bit earlier, you still got eligibility. We're not governed by the NCAA, and therefore we have to make some important decisions. For us as a university, one of the most important decisions is we try to align ourselves with everything our athletics do. Jeremiah Dickey's a fantastic athletic director and has the best interest of those kids in mind doing what they do. And we want to borrow all of the learning that the NCAA has given. Now, we think of the NCAA, it's kind of like a Death Star, but not really. So what's unique about this is that the players don't come to us to learn the games. We attract pro-level players to come and play in college, and their expertise is in the game. For our coaches, myself, Coach Moore, who's assistant coach, and our collection of professional coaches that we bring in to work with our students, the expertise is different. We're the experts in the players and in preparation. And it's that unique separation that allows us to let them get to the level that they want to get to. This is Wasey Williams. He is a 2-time national Madden champion and looks to repeat this year. He's phenomenal. And he's a Boise State student from, of all places, Glens Ferry. And he is as cool and aw shucks Idaho cowboy kid as you could imagine. He's done rodeo. He cannot finish a sentence without sir, at least talking to me, maybe because I'm so old. But he is exactly the kind of Bronco that you would expect in so many other ways. So, as I introduce you to this, I want to kind of help lay out what it is that we do. So 20 hours a week with our players, 24 weeks of contact is what the NCAA encourages, and so we follow it. But we do have a system in place, as any good sports team will do, you know, driven by mottos at the beginning of every year. But out, learn out, plan out, prep out, play. We want to take a very cognitive approach to preparing to compete like you would in other games. And so for us, that means organizing the structure that we have for our students in a way that that gives them a lot of fulfillment in the game, but doesn't take up all their time. You know, people say, well, you got to grind to get good, and that's not true. You have to grind mentally to get good, but you don't have to grind the game. So for us, learning is key, not knowing, right? A lot of times in gamer groups, there's a lot of competition about who knows more. It doesn't matter who knows more. It matters who can learn more, right? As coaches, we ask a ton of questions. Help me understand this new operator and what they bring. So what are you seeing in your competitive ranked games? How are people using it? Where is it, you know, is it OP coming out here at the very beginning? And we actually study, coordinate what the students teach us, build documents and collect data so that we can reteach them what they teach us. strange as that may sound, we have to always assume. I mean, I can't be active in the competitive sphere of these games. It's not productive. I can't compete in all games at the level that these talented students compete in. So I don't try. I play the games. I enjoy the games, but I don't play them competitively because that's not my role. My role is to draw out what they know and know enough about the game to help them develop it. And our job, of course, is to scout our opponents. And you'd be, maybe you'd be exactly surprised. So this is a session with one of our students talking about what he knows. This is a session drawing some of this out. This is Jordan, by the way. He's a top 500 level support player, flex support.
Help define for me how you farm. Now we're talking about farming up your nano by taking poke with your tanks, and then just focusing that healing early.
Correct.
Okay.
We do what's called the soft engage, where a monkey comes to high ground, but he's not actually looking for a kill. He's looking to just get a little poke damage on them, take some himself, and then I'm able to heal that up. And just from doing a couple of those or standing in front of the enemy's sight lines, we're able to get nano in less than a minute.
Love
I
it.
don't believe we do it in this game, but that's the idea.
Okay. That's really interesting. And in general, is that a goal of most Ana games, is to farm that nano quickly?
Mostly yes. When you're playing the Ana, you're almost always playing the Winston with them. If you're on Ryan, you'd rather have Baptiste.
Yeah.
But Ana's able to support Winston at range and give 10 times more value when he's got nano.
Okay. This is going to be good. Okay, tell me at what point you have a clear understanding of what their composition is when you were playing this. Did anybody make a call out and say, here's what they have?
Yes, when our tree walks up there, he does a little bit of scouting, tells us that their tanks is a Sigma. That means they're probably going to be playing a double shield here, which our comp is very good into. We just need to be careful about our engages. Their second tank hasn't picked one yet, but we're still able to engage onto the high ground a bit and take our sight line on the far right there with 3 to support our monkey. And after he does his little soft engage, he's going to take a bit of damage and jump out, so I'm able to heal him up again and start that process of building up mana.
Gotcha. Okay. This is interesting.
See, they're playing the ball sig instead of the double shield like I would think in this scenario. But that still allows us to combat that a fair bit because our tracer can mark the ball, follow him around. If I get dove, we have Kree stun, the Zarya bubble, and my sleep to be able to delete the ball and not take too much poke or harassment.
Okay, so that's good here. What I'm interested in knowing, communication-wise, you're going to get first point without an issue. They have not given you any reason to believe that this is not the right comp moving forward, but you now know that they're going to switch ball here. Well, you remember it. Is there any change in the composition here?
So the composition of the plane relies on poke a lot with the double hit scan and the Sigma. It's not really a standard brawl, but it's something you can brawl with. So playing double bubble, we either have to be really careful and just only engage with nano, or try to find split targets, because we can't really win the linear game of brawl versus brawl. So we'll either have to consider changing that if we're not able to exploit their targets and cut off the angles.
Okay, so I want to talk about your job right here and where you're choosing to play. So you play a great Ana here, and you're doing a good job keeping your monkey no pain alive. It looks pretty dang close. Are you planning on nanoing his rage, or are you looking to put it somewhere else?
I'm looking to nano the next engage. We were talking right here. We wanted to go up, jump, and then use the nano as much as we could, and then after that, warn off, he can use primal. And that gives him an effective 15 seconds of uptime, of ability to stomp on the back line, split the team up, and that allows us to engage onto their front line and take a lot of space from the payload.
I want to come up with a clean way to describe that in comms. So what you're talking about is a principle where you're using the nano to extend a period of damage and aggressiveness, and obviously to make it more survivable. And then at the end of that, or when they're starting to melt it down a little bit, it can trigger the rage and basically just extend 2 halves of a really long ult, right?
this conversation leads
Yeah,
later,
and the
weeks
tracer can
later,
capitalize on all the
into an understanding of what we have come to call tempo.
Um,
But all of the building blocks come through the students.
A concept I really like to think about is uptime. Our monkey is able to be in the fight as long as possible by doing that. He doesn't need to come back to healing or anything. So he can stay in the fight for a very long time when they need to have their downtime, as we call it, where their abilities are on cooldown and they need to get back for a second. But our monkey still is able to apply pressure, allows our front line to walk in and exploit the targets that are split up.
and he's going to do a lot of job, especially in the second half of that link. So I don't know that we have to have a solution today, but I'm really interested in a way we might be able to add to our communication process a way to describe that approach so that it doesn't have to be explained. And I don't know what the word is. I don't know what the key word is, but I think
Tempo.
that's really valuable in this
Game
meta
tempo.
if we want to use an ult that way. Now it's great to say, well, everybody should know that. Yes, but we often mess up things that everybody should have known, but we just didn't communicate. So I want to come up with a way to communicate that. It doesn't have to be today, but if you think on it, I'll think on it too. Let's come up with a way to describe linking ults or stacking ults. We're going to stack our monkey here. We're gonna nano into rage, right? Or we're gonna nano then rage. Maybe that's what it is, or something like that. Something that we can talk about as a ideal condition. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Have your entire team on the same page. So I agree.
Exactly. So whatever definition it needs to be, if the one exists in the lexicon now, let's use it, and everybody will already know it. If not, let's create it and reinforce it. Okay. So here we go. I'm excited to see this ult. There's the first part. And Moira's got no fade.
Our Zarya is able to take space. Our Tracer's in the back line. Our tanks can do a lot here, and their tanks are split on our side. We sleep the run, get that kill. Now their Sigma's low. We have a lot of free payload space.
So you can tell through this conversation, we're talking about stuff we've talked about before, and I've asked him for a definition of farming, even though I know what farming is. I have my own definition, but to verify that we're still on the same page. And I'll often learn something new that I haven't seen before when a player gives me their definition. We can continue to craft that. And it's okay to relearn things that we've learned before. So it's okay to ask questions that we know the answer to, because often we'll discover something we haven't seen before. Because again, learning is the key, not knowing. And these all make their way into our planning process. Sometimes we just generate questions from them, but sometimes, most of the time, they go into our game plan. I use these conversations to create and organize our collective understanding, specifically what everyone's job is. I mean, not to channel Belichick, but do your job. We have to identify what the job is, and players need to know what their role is within a specific composition and play style so that they can be the most effective for our team. And the players define that, and we capture it and constantly check to make sure that they understand it and that it's what we still believe in the situations. And over time, nuances and metas change, and we may come up with exceptions, but when they play this against us, we want to modify this way, we're going to play it in a different way. All of that's okay, but we create the documentation so that we understand fully and can share and communicate what the players understand in a way that we all agree. Because that agreement, that alignment is what creates success competitively. A good plan, well executed, we can always have success. So, in our team room game planning, we're talking about the teams that we're going to compete against and what their tendencies are. Scouting gives us that. So we may reset this conversation. On Route 66, if we think that they're going to run some form of the ball brawl, ball diva brawl, do we want to double bubble against it? And if so, what are the win conditions? Do we need to farm nano early? Is nano the win condition? How do we get tempo there? Do we need to isolate and take space? What's our priority on a diving ball? Who's our first target? And what are their key cooldowns? Right? We want to talk about these things and know these things outside of the game so we can execute them in the game. It was Eisenhower who said that I find that in preparing for battle, Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. And so we spend time on it. And as the coach, because I take feverish notes, my job, again, is to translate their understanding into a cohesive, but cohesive game plan to the point that I can say, remember, we want to farm here, soft engage, then push, don't go after the ball, look for the Zarya personal. That's our win condition. But I deliver it to them in a meaningful way that resets our collective understanding into a firm game plan. And that's what I believe that a coach should do. My philosophy for me first and our coaches is that we're trying to learn as much as we can from our players and that we ask questions, even if we know the answers. Because hearing those answers can be really informative in the process. And we learn and define what it is that we know and when that knowledge has the highest value to us. We define roles, expectations, strategies, compositions, win conditions, timing, plays, all of these things. Starting with the coaches, we study and we scout. And I'll share scouting in a second. But we translate what players know, think, and feel into a cohesive, agreed strategy. We use their expertise. And you've probably seen the meme of me going full Pete Carroll with a play card in front of my mouth. Dan at Maryville had some fun with it on Maryville on April Fool's Day. But you get what it's all about. It's a tool that I use to record their understanding in a way that I can help organize it. It's my portable Google, right? Here's what one of those printouts looks like, laminated, of course, so I can draw on them with a pen. And they don't get wet and sweat. But it consolidates our understanding and our scouting with what they've shown us and what we plan to do against it. And these are developed through conversations with the players. We typically add our scouting to the document, which our players do not do. They don't do their own scouting. We curate that scouting for them with some very specific questions and a team of analysts and scouts. But I carry that scouting with me onto stage so that I can counter a misunderstanding. A player might suggest, oh, well, they probably won't do that. And we can counter with actually the numbers. In their last 6 matchups, they've gone that direction 4 times. And just so you know, here are the items that they've built out historically. So for us, that's how the process for us goes. We allow the students to teach us, create conversations around the game so they can share what they know. We check our understanding, their understanding. We organize things and continually check, is this what we want to do in this case? Does everybody understand the role? What do we have to do to be successful, essentially? Outlearn, outplan, outprep, outplay. Hopefully, outplay. So this is the process. Change gears a little bit. I want to show you what this process looks like in preparation for one specific opponent and the outcome of that. The most evil opponent ever, UNLV. I shouldn't say their name. Maybe I won't. But we have a long history with them. About 4 years, 5 years. In our very first year, 5 years ago, we qualified to play in the first Mountain West esports showdown against this school. We traveled to Las Vegas for the championship with our well-known, at the time, co-ed squad. They memed a bit. Their goal was to embarrass us, which was not the nicest thing to do. Well, we kind of never forgot it. The rivalries are good. They lift us. And it begins a number of years ago in Vegas. A year later, we played them in the Mountain West Conference Championship again and lost again. It was closer. In 2020, we qualified again, undefeated, to play them for the conference championship in Las Vegas again. Again, we lost. And while our talent level and preparation had improved dramatically, let's be clear, it was a very talented team, deserving of the 3 conference championships they had earned in this game thus far. But this is what's important about all sports, even esports, is that we use these crucibles to develop character, to learn how to overcome tough things, to fight, to gain an inch, and then to celebrate that inch, honestly. This school was one of the schools that helped teach us a lot of lessons. And so for good reason, we always have them circled on the calendar. In so many ways, this season, the one we just finished, was one of the most successful. This is just the Overwatch record. Lots of great recruiting was starting to pay off. We love the character of the men and women we have on our team. We made great strides in our preparation, our understanding of what is important to know about your opponent, practice strategies, VOD review strategies. Everything was working very well. Room for improvement, of course, but moving along. Our system has really helped us yield results. And so we qualified for the round of 8 for the big Blizzard National Championship, only to lose to UCI, who went on to the semifinals. And we were able to win the Mountain West, the NECC, and the Play Versus. But our final matchup of the year had the most meaning. It was the team who must not be named. And it gave us the opportunity to put to the test everything that we had learned and prepared all season. Our last game of the year would be against a team that we had never beaten. How epic was that? Losses can be good for a team, honestly. They force us to reevaluate your approaches, your methods, your strategies. And one of the things that we learned is that the best teams can more quickly recognize, communicate, and address the challenges that they see in the game. Communication is key. We saw that as a weakness of ours early, and that we needed to develop a system to improve. So for the last 2 years, across all games, we've imposed a communication strategy with very specific roles and responsibilities. And I'm going to introduce you to that now as it applies to Overwatch. One of the things that you'll hear in our facility and our coaches is never take a fair fight, which is not to indicate cheating, but rather we be more prepared, more focused, and have a better understanding of how to take advantage in those engagements. As a head coach, it means that I am making sure that there are no tech issues, comfort issues, calorie or hydration issues. My players will tell you the number of times I stick a Cliff Bar in their face is maddening to them. But we do it to create better playing conditions so they can even have just these fractional gains over another team. It means that we know more about map selection, comp selection, and at times it means that the coach will make a hard call. I'm going to put this person in instead of this other person. Not because they did anything wrong, but because this gives us the best chance. Never take a fair fight. And a big part of that is that we focus on teaching a strong communication structure that works in multiple phases. I'm showing you a couple here, active and passive for our purposes today. Overwatch is a game of fights and controlling space. And so active represents the fight. We're talking about the balance. We're up 1, we're down 2. No healers. We're looking for this target. Go to their back line. Here's where we want to play. Calling out the targets. We want to talk about cooldowns. Zarya, no personal. We need to indicate in our comms what the opportunity is, the weakness is. We want to communicate this. Faro's on high ground over here with the junk. Right, we want to look for opportunities and coordinate, use our ultimates to maintain that tempo. Passive is in between. We talk about our ult economy. This is what they have. This is what we have. What's the priority? Make sure that if we do this, that person has to be engaged. Yeah. And when they use grab, we're going to, for example, how we're going to exchange the ults we have. That's what happens in the passive phase. We want to position here so they can't have it. Yeah. We want to talk specifically about our win condition as well. And if necessary, what the role of different folks will be in achieving that. Active phase, primary, and passive phase are the primary phases. And during our match for the final game of the year against the school that will not be named, I'm going to show you the player side communications and what they were talking about. When you'll hear some mistakes, you may even see us lose a fight. But you'll notice the structure of the communication and the limitation of things that do not advance our ability to take a better fight. So let's take a look.
No, not Tracer.
we
Play
use it
for
for spamming.
I just think whenever they run Ball Tracer, it's just good because you can contest
Okay, well,
both of them,
yeah, but
like
if
almost
they
no
run
matter
Ball
what. But I don't think they will because it's good ball map.
Wait, what are you going after you TP, Brian? Okay, yeah.
I like the junk a lot, especially because you can trap on top of us for junk tracer.
Yeah,
I just feel like they're gonna
we're
play
more
ball,
brawlers.
spam.
They're gonna play ball, I think. Yeah.
I feel like they're gonna play spam. I don't know if junk's gonna work, but
Take TP, take TP, take TP, take TP.
If they're spamming, we just try to force a brawl.
they have Diva, ball,
Diva ball. I'm taking top left.
Tracer, Ash. I think.
I pull. Nice. Diva half. She's out.
Ball's coming behind.
Nice.
I'm
I pull
burning,
again.
but
Look at break it open. She's out. Ash low, Diva low.
I'm Tracer ball.
Can we speed main? Can we speed main on break soon?
Not now.
Break feeding main. Break feeding main.
Block on me point. Block on me point.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Diva. I pull main.
On your door. Ball on your door. Backline.
Look at Ash. Look at Ash. Look at Ash. Look at Ash.
I'm on her.
Dead on point.
Baby
Ash.
Diva 1.
Ash 1. Ash 1.
That's dead.
I'm the only one protecting point right now.
Go point. Everyone go point. Everyone go point. You just win.
I pull break
Ball.
feeding. Break feeding.
We
Break
go
feeding.
point. We win. We go point. We win.
Yeah, I need heals left side, Mason. I'm peeking.
Okay. Come left. Thank you.
We should
Set up top left.
Set up top left. We have window.
I feel like we should. Okay.
Very early.
Just deny the ball. Just deny the
They're
ball.
on Farah. They're on Farah.
If you guys
We have
deny
to
the ball,
boot.
this comes
Watch the
really
left.
easy.
Flank. Yeah.
They have men up,
If I have to go
men up
touch point, I have to.
I'm gonna try to keep him marked.
Yeah, we'll just shoot whoever contests with you.
Let me know if you see him, please.
I'm gonna see. Ball's going
I
right.
pull right side.
Yeah, everybody's going right.
Hey, can we flip now? We catch on it. We
Yeah,
catch on it. We flip now.
They're coming around the other way anyways. Look.
Oh yeah.
Oh wait, they're baiting.
Anna's still here. Anna's still here.
Okay. You're working.
On a main.
Oh,
On a
she's
main.
out. She's out.
That's fine. That's fine. She's
I
out.
need help point.
Help me, main.
I'm with you.
I'm contesting. I pull pharmacy.
You can test Farah. You can try to top of us. Flanking. He was one.
Down three.
I'm dying on point.
We need fire contest.
I agree. Left turn.
Okay, 47%. Good. Talk about the next fight. How you want to set it up?
They have Diva bomb next fight.
Let's
Diva bomb, mana barrage, pulse.
I'm gonna take left side and bongo.
Honest, you don't have your back. Yeah, I'm 3 seconds behind.
Leave it right here.
Yeah. I'm gonna bongo
Left
side.
barrage. Okay. Oh, I was still walking. Dude, they're all gonna roll through.
Careful. Ball feeding. Ball. Care barrage.
They wasted mine. Just break it, please. Care goblin.
Oh,
yeah, thank you.
Mine's are gone.
I can walk left.
Come here, right?
Oh wait, walk the same way.
Okay. We all go right. All right.
They have barrage.
Left. Just care.
Help kill main.
I'm
Give
fine.
it like left. Carry your anti.
I want to push. Kill baby. I pull the baby on.
Tracer one behind. We'll save you.
We need to take space slowly.
Tracer's behind you. Shoot Diva. Winnable.
Yeah, but I can zone both supports. I can kill both supports maybe.
Kill ball.
Help. Oh, go point.
I'm contesting both supports.
Just go point.
Diva Cubby. Nice. They have barrage next fight. On a feeding main.
If you get
stuff, they don't get value.
Yeah, we should hold.
We don't need everyone
Just watch
left.
barrage,
We
just
don't need
watch
everyone left. We need more people to come point.
Oh, help me.
Nice. You're good. You're fine.
Care barrage
right here.
Careful. Nice. We need to
We
hold
can try and
close.
hold
The ball
close.
can't.
I
Yeah,
see.
the ball can't hold
We can
space.
hold close. Watch out, you guys that are split.
Yeah.
Just care barrage. I can
barrage
try to
from left.
pull.
Press is on flank. On me.
I pull the fire maybe.
I get care.
They got all of them.
Yeah.
I'm shooting
Chasing
far.
behind.
We should
One,
push,
one,
push,
one.
push. Care far. She's gonna barrage. No, she's
She's
dead.
not here.
I'm pulling baby back in. Don't kill.
Oh, maybe.
Last fight.
We hold him here.
Yeah, on a one, maybe.
I think the ball's
I pulled this statue. We kill on it.
Nice.
Mark it.
Hell,
Just
I'm on
this.
here.
Ball's here. Yeah, mark him. Or huh? I don't think they touch.
Nice.
Oh my god!
Walk is on Arissa in their back line.
It's pretty cool to see it in action. Hopefully it makes more sense. There are lots of mistakes in there in our communication process and lots of things that we can work on. But the difference in that was not individual skill, but coordinated team effort. The only way to coordinate good team effort is to talk about it, to be deliberate about it, to call it out when it's not working. And to make sure that our communication structure supports good, connected team play. It's critical. It's something we've been working on and continue to work on. And we'll work on in all of our games as long as we play these games. That was the first map of game 5 against UNLV in the championship game. As we discussed before, preparation for us is key. It's everything. We don't want to take a fair fight. We don't want to just balance things and hope it works out, because all of these games allow everybody to play the same strength. No one's bigger or faster. You're only smarter and more coordinated. We want to be in the best position to be successful as we can. We want to never take a fair fight. And so we have to choose to place ourselves, to place our team in a position to be successful. And our coaching staff and our analysts know a ton about our opponents, and we know a ton about ourselves. We gather any and all relevant data. We watch their streams. We look for composition preferences, swap preferences, and we organize that information in so that it's usable. And we don't want to take a fair fight, as I mentioned. So knowing the tendencies of our opponent is just responsible preparation, and that falls on our coaches and our staff. And so we organize our own games and review them in a way that allows us to collect statistics. And I can tell you things like 81% of the time when we go +2 in a fight, we win the fight. So that's a win condition for us, +2. 81%, 88% of the time when we lose our main tank first, we lose the fight. Overwatch is a game of fights. Knowing those things about this team in this setting through aggregated data is really important. And we know that losing a Reinhardt is more devastating than, say, losing a Winston or a Wrecking Ball. And so composition makes a difference. It's even less impactful if we lose a hog. All of these things help us to understand our win condition and to not be distracted by hunches. I wonder. Data like it does in all big sports, right? We use tools we use data to pull our tools. Yeah. We want to know what their success rates are on different heroes, on different maps, different times of day, which allows us to come to a place that I'm about to show you now. We had just lost the second map, and we're in a position to choose the third map. This is an example of sometimes that preparation means that I'm going to make a hard call, take it out of the hands of the players. And they've taught me how to do this, right? I'm the speaker for our collective understanding. They've sustained our approach. We're in alignment. So I can give them guidance here, but it comes from their knowledge.
We want this map because didn't they run our strat on defense last time?
If they do, that's fine. You just go jump.
Yeah,
I'm talking about a hunt.
We have the highest win rate on this of all these maps and the most time preparing it. This is our best map.
Yeah, if they copy our strat, we do the same we did on Route 66.
I think the best way to break it is Echo on the back right and then Junkrat from main.
No, you can TP me over on Junkrat, I'll get a 7k.
Yeah. I think that's honestly the best way. Like, you TP your supports over, and then tank forces part, and then, Junkrat and Echo.
They just spam a hallway, dude.
Yeah, when teams run that, we actually like struggle to hold for more than 30 seconds, and then the tire is really good.
Because you're so strong first and second hold, too.
Kel, you heard it. You have an assignment. You got it. You got to get us into our fights properly. Goblin, let's make sure that you are.
This is our stage that they're playing.
Providing value with whatever your switch is, and don't be afraid to ask. What do we need here? That's maybe the greatest thing you could ask. And if you're at all concerned about what you want to do, and you heard it, Michael. You got to get us in the right fights, and when you do, we roll. I have full confidence this is our map, and we pull ahead again here.
Let's go.
If we play these guys to 5 maps, we're going to beat them in 5 maps. I'm just being clear on that. Here we go.
And we did. Which brings us to the final map. Control point, Nepal, best of 3. We win the first. You saw the communication as we played Sanka. We lost the second. That was Village, but barely. Brings us down to the final map. And this is one that we developed a very unique strategy on that uses Sim and Reaper. Sim teleports, Reaper, a lot of blast damage up close, hard on tanks. But Sim is essential to the success of this composition. And in the last map, we got the map that we wanted, and it's the highest win rate of all of our control maps. We'd only lost it twice the entire year. It's the strongest of the control maps. We also knew that on the final point, which was Shrine, that our Sim Reaper strategy, which allows us to teleport to point, wins over time because it allows us to extend fights and roll that clock toward 99. If we have control, we can trickle on and prevent them from taking it because our return time is so much shorter. And we can take and extend longer fights, which means we can own the point. We can charge a lot more of our percentage. We don't have to win as many fights outright. If they make the mistake, UNLV, and switch their composition, we instantly have a distinct advantage. And we knew them well enough. As it turns out, it played out that way. Let me show you the finale of our final match of the 2020 season against this opponent. And it turns out, 2021 season, this will be the final
As that
game
shatter
here.
plows into Wild Wing, and Boise State finds themselves up with the advantage in this one, able to take out Lucky as it goes on to overtime. And now Lucky is taken out. Now UNLV has to go on to the point. Slamturo does throw out the minefield, making it a little bit tougher for Boise State. They are able to take out Slam Silk with the bomb onto Guac. Karma also going down. And can Boise State win it here? Can they do it? They are able to take out Wild Wing one after the other. They're getting close. Boise State almost there. Can they do it? Goblin taken out, but QWERTY also taken out in response as well. On to Lucky. They're almost there. Can they do it? Come on.
The Symmetra MVP is, in fact, Boise State's getting back to the point faster because there's no teleporter up. Photon barrier goes down. It's all up to QWERTY.
Boise State, you have taken down Goliath. You are the Mountain West champions.
Now, the MVP of that, too, really, it depends on how you want to phrase it. It's Plato for staying on the Symmetra, and it's UNLV's refusal to play the Symmetra because that final fight, the difference was there was no teleporter for UNLV. Their members took longer than Boise State members took to get back to the point. I don't know if that was a call by UNLV to not have it or what, but that lack of a Symmetra just cost UNLV a championship.
And like I said, Boise State, your Broncos are the Mountain West esports champions. After 3 years of going up against UNLV, they have finally toppled the Rebels and are going to go away with the championship for spring 2021.
In so many ways, this victory is one of the most satisfying. It's got a lot of history, obviously, but not because of who we beat. They were a great opponent, but they forced us to evaluate ourselves and to just simply get better, to figure out what we needed to do collectively as a team, as a university, as a program needed to do better. And they inspired change in us. We have a tremendous amount of respect for that. So this victory was just a single indicator of many of the growth of our players, our students, our program, and across multiple years. We had to be in alignment and have a really special moment. The players had to trust the scouts and the coaches. The coaches had to trust the players and their ability and their knowledge. Nobody knew more than anybody else, and everyone had a role to play. It is that alignment in esports and trust in esports that allows a team, enables a team to have success as a unit. And despite our mistakes, we did enough in this match to win a significant match for our university and community. So all 15 players on the roster of our Overwatch team in 2020 will receive this championship ring. You'll notice it represents three different things. The National Play Versus Championship on the left there, and in which every single one of our players, from our top 500 players to our diamond players, they all played and contributed to a successful season there. You'll notice the NECC logo on the right and the Mountain West logos. And this ring will serve as a reminder that when we work hard, we trust one another, we set big goals, when our vision, our goals, our effort is in alignment, we can achieve great things. And for some of these players, it was their last competitive collegiate game. And they went out on top. For others, it just sets new bar season to come that we're already engaged in now. But for everyone, we know we can do tough things. So thank you for the opportunity to give you this little bit, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have and just hang out in general.
Well, I had a question.
All I have to say is I went to school at the way wrong time.
Yeah, we all did.
No, Doc, like I was working at Boise State when you started, and I was like, should I just start going back to school so I can get
I've told you before, you're still eligible. I don't know what the game's going to be, but you're still eligible.
Here, Bert.
Well, I had no idea the success from your coaching and your players, what you guys have done for BSU athletics altogether. To understand the range of it, how many players are there? Are they, I guess, three-part question. How many players are on the team, and are they multi-purpose players? And what range of titles are played?
So 30 folks on our official roster and scholarships. We offer about 150,000 in total scholarships. We're one of 300 different universities that offers scholarships. Our team is about average in size. Maryville, Harrisburg, Winthrop, UCI, Utah, Missouri are probably the other top schools as far as recruiting top players, including us. There's some others that are in there. Northwood recruits some top players. They don't have as many spots as we do. Part of the reason that we have the number of spots that we do is that we also scholarship our production team. You know, stuff like you saw there doesn't happen in a pocket. We have to build it. And being a Division I football school, we do play on blue turf. Our stage is covered with original Generation 1 blue AstroTurf taken from the stadium, so it's got history. And but in order to do that, we have to be responsible for our own storytelling. Otherwise, no one knows, right? And that's always the case in big football towns, and we're a big football town now. So, and that's okay. That's just, that's the culture. But so they do not play typically multiple titles competitively. With that 20 hours a week, we use their time pretty effectively in competition, practice, and prep, and so it would be very difficult for them to have two schedules. And it would also be difficult for them to maintain competitive average. It doesn't mean that there aren't some talented folks. We've got some SSL Rocket League players that are, plat to low diamond League of Legends players. They just can't spend the same amount of time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think the last part was titles. How many different titles are played on the team?
5 titles right now that we have as varsity. Varsity simply means we recruit, scholarships are available, but not guaranteed. We monitor their grades, we coach them directly. Supported has many of the same things. We broadcast them. They get to use our facilities. We put gear on them. We promote them. They use our official university slots in these big major tournaments. But we don't coach them directly, and we don't do grade checks with them. Not formally in the same way. So we've got about 30 varsity and around 200 club.
I passed the mic to whoever's
Oh,
next.
and the titles that I mentioned.
Yeah, the 5 varsity clubs.
League of Legends, Rocket League, Overwatch, Valorant, and Madden are our varsity titles. And Valorant is brand new this year. They're a very young team, but they're doing fantastic. Our supported games are Rainbow Six, Call of Duty. We have club versions of all the ones I mentioned before as well that we support. And as new games pop up, we support players. Hearthstone, Fortnite, we support them.
So, question. So when Overwatch 2 comes out, eventually, do you guys see a big switch to Overwatch 2, or are you guys going to still play competitively Overwatch more?
We'll go where the scene goes. Okay. And the most important thing is, how do we play Colorado State? Right? How do we play UNLV? Where's everybody going to be? My guess is that there'll be a kind of a crossfade moment where both of them are happening, and then they'll turn to Overwatch 2. It does not change. The game, believe it or not, is not the important part. It's who is the competition and what's the process to prepare. As you see when you see the guts of it, it doesn't matter if they change the game significantly if we can still play and plan and practice and identify roles and win conditions. I mean, the games are always a vehicle for team play, right?
Last question. Who's your Overwatch main?
My Overwatch main?
Yours, yeah.
Oh, Baby Diva. Pilot Diva, 100%. She's OP. Yes.
Thank you.
And the way I think about it is very very Pokemon way of thinking about it, is that when Diva gets demeched, or health gets down in her mech, she pops out and becomes her pilot form, and she can charge to call that mech back down. I believe that's the evolved form of Diva, right? That she evolves to Pilot Diva with 150 health and this pistol cannon. Oh, exactly.
Oh, and so mine was about scouting. So
Yeah.
you would have, what's your preferred method?
Talent scouting or opponent scouting?
Talent. So would you just scope out clans or Twitch streaming?
So opponent scouting. If we're looking to, the terms get intermixed all the time. Scouting for potential recruits and that kind of that's a separate thing. But typically, it depends. It depends by game, but most of the time, once a team is on our radar, we collect a list of common Twitch locations. We search for video. We use, Bill Belichick's dad, Steve, was a scout for the U.S. Naval Academy for 40 years or something like that, and wrote a really good book on scouting. And the Cliff's Notes are usable information, not useful information. So when we watch these, we're looking to try to identify what compositions they run, what tendencies they have, who their players are. Are there players that have been playing with them that may not be on their official part of their roster that we may need to be aware of? So we look at those videos and we try to identify how they play and where they play. The good news is, like football or basketball, you can get a pretty good sense of what somebody is successful at or what they like to run, and then we can prepare to dismantle that, in certain ways. So most of the time, it's just understanding what compositions they like or what they might choose and where they might play.
Yeah, quick question on scouting of the players.
Yeah.
Especially with League of Legends, which I'm really familiar with, they track ELO so efficiently now. Is it like football in where you know someone young is going into school and he's like a high challenger rated player, and schools are approaching that person now?
It's very hard to be a challenger League of Legends player in high school right now and me not know who you are.
Yeah.
We have a big board, a big magnetic board with dry erase, and we track anywhere around 200 students at any one time. I've got students on that board that graduate in 2024. Doesn't mean that we're recruiting them and offering them now, but we know that our tier of player is for example, Brett Narkowitz from Glide, Oregon, is a freshman with us this year. He's playing on Dignitas Academy. He's going to get another academy offer, I'm sure, in November, December, and he may spend the spring semester as a professional player and then come back. Our tier of player is going to have the ability to bounce back and forth between that. So we want to identify, for us, we want to identify players that have not yet had that experience, that are really strong players, but high school players, because their families are involved. Right? So we love our players, but we want them to be coming from high school. We can go out and seek great players that have played professionally, and we have before, and have them come to college, but that's not the same experience as somebody who's going through high school and wants to, it's not as grounded or anchored. And we know that that's going to be a relationship that we can help influence. How do you manage? There's a great young player that hasn't committed to Boise State yet, but likely will for Rocket League, Durtho, Emiliano Flores from California, and he's a bubble pro player, at 17. And we know he's going to have an opportunity to play professional. We want to find a way for him to be able to do that while he's going to college, and we can give his school competitive time over to that, but still keep him on scholarship. And then when he's not participating in that, just keep those lines clean so that he can get a degree, because that's really what's important to him, he and his family. And the pro team won't ever give him that. So won't ever give him a degree, but we can. Yeah. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a really kind of a strange, convoluted world. I did not know nearly as much about it when we started as I do today.
Chris, thank you so much. Doc.
You bet.
I always mess that up.
I've got stickers
it's
here.
Doc.
I've got stickers. Honestly,
I'm gonna
nobody
tattoo
calls
his
me
name
Chris.
to my arm. Yeah, I know. It really is Doc Haskell.
It really is.
I
No
don't know why
one
I
calls me.
read his name. I must
Yeah.
I think it's like I'm nervous when I'm around.
You guys rock, by the way.
Thank you so much.
You bet.